Chapter 12, Part 2 of Kokoro, Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 12, The Idea of Pre-Existence, Part 2, Section 5. The prodigious complexity of the methods by which science has arrived at conclusions so strangely in harmony with the ancient thought of the East, may suggest the doubt whether those conclusions could ever be made clearly comprehensible to the mass of Western minds. Certainly it would seem that just as the real doctrines of Buddhism can be taught to the majority of believers through forms only, so the philosophy of science can be communicated to the masses through suggestion only, suggestion of such facts or arrangements of facts as must appeal to any naturally intelligent mind. But the history of scientific progress assures the efficiency of this method, and there is no strong reason for the supposition that, because the processes of the higher science remain above the mental reach of the unscientific classes, the conclusions of that science will not be generally accepted. The dimensions and weights of planets, the distances and the composition of stars, the law of gravitation, the signification of heat, light, and color, the nature of sound, and a host of other scientific discoveries are familiar to thousands quite ignorant of the details of the methods by which such knowledge was obtained. Again we have evidence that every great progressive movement of science during the century has been followed by considerable modifications of popular beliefs. Already the churches, though clinging still to the hypothesis of a specially created soul, have accepted the main doctrine of physical evolution, and neither fixity of belief nor intellectual retrogression can be rationally expected in the immediate future. Further changes of religious ideas are to be looked for, and it is even likely that they will be effected rapidly rather than slowly. Their exact nature, indeed, cannot be predicted, but existing intellectual tendencies imply that the doctrine of psychological evolution must be accepted, though not at once so as to set any final limit to ontological speculation, and that the whole conception of the ego will be eventually transformed through the consequently developed idea of pre-existence. Section 6. More detailed consideration of these probabilities may be ventured. They will not perhaps be acknowledged as probabilities by persons who regard science as a destroyer rather than a modifier. But such thinkers forget that religious feeling is something infinitely more profound than dogma, that it survives all gods and all forms of creed, and that it only widens and deepens and gathers power with intellectual expansion. That as mere doctrine religion will ultimately pass away, is a conclusion to which the study of evolution leads. But that religion as feeling, or even as faith in the unknown power shaping equally a brain or a constellation, can ever utterly die, is not at present conceivable. Science wars only upon erroneous interpretations of phenomena. It only magnifies the cosmic mystery, and proves that everything, however minute, is infinitely wonderful and incomprehensible. And it is this indubitable tendency of science to broaden beliefs and to magnify cosmic emotion which justifies the supposition that future modifications of Western religious ideas will be totally unlike any modifications effected in the past; that the Occidental conception of self will orb into something akin to the Oriental conception of self; and that all present petty metaphysical notions of personality and individuality, as realities per se, will be annihilated. Already the growing popular comprehension of the facts of heredity, as science teaches them, indicates the path by which some at least of these modifications will be reached. In the coming contest over the great question of psychological evolution, common intelligence will follow science along the line of least resistance, and that line will doubtless be the study of heredity, since the phenomena to be considered, however in themselves uninterpretable, are familiar to general experience, and afford partial answers to countless old enigmas. It is thus quite possible to imagine a coming form of Western religion supported by the whole power of synthetic philosophy, differing from Buddhism mainly in the greater exactness of its conceptions, holding the soul as a composite and teaching a new spiritual law resembling the doctrine of karma. An objection to this idea will, however, immediately present itself to many minds. Such a modification of belief, it will be averred, would signify the sudden conquest and transformation of feelings by ideas. The world, says Herbert Spencer, is not governed by ideas but by feelings, to which ideas serve only as guides. How are the notions of a change, such as that supposed, to be reconciled with common knowledge of existing religious sentiment in the West, and the force of religious emotionalism? Were the ideas of pre-existence and of the soul as multiple really antagonistic to Western religious sentiment, no satisfactory answer could be made. But are they so antagonistic? The idea of pre-existence certainly is not. The Occidental mind is already prepared for it. It is true that the notion of self as a composite, destined to dissolution, may seem little better than the materialistic idea of annihilation, at least to those still unable to divest themselves of the old habits of thought. Nevertheless, impartial reflection will show that there is no emotional reason for dreading the disintegration of the ego. Actually, though unwittingly, it is for this very disintegration that Christians and Buddhists alike perpetually pray. Who has not often wished to rid himself of the worst parts of his nature, of tendencies to folly or to wrong, of impulses to say or do unkind things, of all that lower inheritance which still clings about the higher man, and weighs down his finest aspirations, yet that of which we so earnestly desire the separation, the elimination, the death, is not less surely a part of psychological inheritance, of veritable self, than are those younger and larger faculties which help to the realization of noble ideals. Rather than an end to be feared, the dissolution of self is the one object of all objects to which our efforts should be turned. What no new philosophy can forbid us to hope is that the best elements of self will thrill on to seek loftier affinities, to enter into grander and yet grander combinations, till the supreme revelation comes, and we discern through infinite vision, through the vanishing of all self, the absolute reality. For while we know that even the so-called elements themselves are evolving, we have no proof that anything utterly dies. That we are is the certainty that we have been and will be. We have survived countless evolutions, countless universes. We know that through the cosmos all is law. No chance decides what units shall form the planetary core, or what shall feel the sun; what shall be locked in granite and basalt, or shall multiply in plant and in animal. So far as reason can venture to infer from analogy, the cosmical history of every ultimate unit, psychological or physical, is determined just as surely and as exactly as in the Buddhist doctrine of karma. Section 7. The influence of science will not be the only factor in the modification of Western religious beliefs. Oriental philosophy will certainly furnish another. Sanskrit, Chinese, and Pali scholarship, and the tireless labor of philologists in all parts of the East, are rapidly familiarizing Europe and America with all the great forms of Oriental thought. Buddhism is being studied with interest throughout the Occident, and the results of these studies are yearly showing themselves more and more definitely in the mental products of the highest culture. The schools of philosophy are not more visibly affected than the literature of the period. Proof that a reconsideration of the problem of the ego is everywhere forcing itself upon Occidental minds may be found not only in the thoughtful prose of the time, but even in its poetry and its romance. Ideas impossible a generation ago are changing current thought, destroying old tastes, and developing higher feelings. Creative art, working under larger inspiration, is telling what absolutely novel and exquisite sensations, what hitherto unimaginable pathos, what marvelous deepening of emotional power may be gained in literature with a recognition of the idea of pre-existence. Even in fiction we learn that we have been living in a hemisphere only, that we have been thinking but half-thoughts, that we need a new faith to join past with future over the great parallel of the present, and so to round out our emotional world into a perfect sphere. The clear conviction that the self is multiple, however paradoxical the statements seem, is the absolutely necessary step to the vaster conviction that the many are one, that life is unity, that there is no finite but only infinite. Until that blind pride which imagines self unique shall have been broken down, and the feeling of self and of selfishness shall have been utterly decomposed, the knowledge of the ego as infinite, as the very cosmos, never can be reached. Doubtless the simple emotional conviction that we have been in the past will be developed long before the intellectual conviction that the ego as one is a fiction of selfishness. But the composite nature of self must at last be acknowledged, though its mystery remain. Science postulates a hypothetical psychological unit as well as a hypothetical physiological unit. But either postulated entity defies the uttermost power of mathematical estimate, seems to resolve itself into pure ghostliness. The chemist, for working purposes, must imagine an ultimate atom; but the fact of which the imagined atom is the symbol may be a force centre only, nay, a void, a vortex, an emptiness, as in Buddhist concept. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. What is form, that is emptiness; what is emptiness, that is form. Perception and conception, name and knowledge, all these are emptiness. For science and for Buddhism alike, the cosmos resolves itself into a vast phantasmagoria, a mere play of unknown and immeasurable forces. Buddhist faith, however, answers the questions whence and whither, in its own fashion, and predicts in every great cycle of evolution a period of spiritual expansion in which the memory of former births returns, and all the future simultaneously opens before the vision unveiled, even to the heaven of heavens. Science here remains dumb, but her silence is the silence of the Gnostics, Sige, the daughter of depth and the mother of spirit. What we may allow ourselves to believe, with the full consent of science, is that marvelous revelations await us. Within recent time new senses and powers have been developed: the sense of music, the ever-growing faculties of the mathematician. Reasonably it may be expected that still higher unimaginable faculties will be evolved in our descendants. Again, it is known that certain mental capacities, undoubtedly inherited, develop in old age only, and the average life of the human race is steadily lengthening. With increased longevity there surely may come into sudden being, through the unfolding of the larger future brain, powers not less wonderful than the ability to remember former births. The dreams of Buddhism can scarcely be surpassed, because they touch the infinite; but who can presume to say they never will be realized? Note: it may be necessary to remind some of those kind enough to read the foregoing that the words soul, self, ego, transmigration, heredity, although freely used by me, convey meanings entirely foreign to Buddhist philosophy. Soul, in the English sense of the word, does not exist for the Buddhist. Self is an illusion, or rather a plexus of illusions. Transmigration, as the passing of soul from one body to another, is expressly denied in Buddhist texts of unquestionable authority. It will therefore be evident that the real analogy which does exist between the doctrine of karma and the scientific facts of heredity is far from complete. Karma signifies the survival not of the same composite individuality, but of its tendencies, which recombine to form a new composite individuality. The new being does not necessarily take even a human form. The karma does not descend from parent to child; it is independent of the line of heredity, although physical conditions of life seem to depend upon karma. The karma being of a beggar may have rebirth in the body of a king, that of a king in the body of a beggar, yet the conditions of either reincarnation have been predetermined by the influence of karma. It will be asked, what then is the spiritual element in each being that continues unchanged? The spiritual kernel, so to speak, within the shell of karma, the power that makes for righteousness. If soul and body alike are temporary composites, and the karma, itself temporary, the only source of personality, what is the worth or meaning of Buddhist doctrine? What is it that suffers by karma? What is it that lies within the illusion, that makes progress, that attains nirvana? Is it not a self? Not in our sense of the word. The reality of what we call self is denied by Buddhism. That which forms and dissolves the karma, that which makes for righteousness, that which reaches nirvana, is not our ego in our Western sense of the word. Then what is it? It is the divine in each being. It is called in Japanese Muga no Taiga, the great self without selfishness. There is no other true self. The self wrapped in illusion is called Nyoraizo, Tathagata Garbha, the Buddha yet unborn as one in a womb. The infinite exists potentially in every being. That is the reality. The other self is a falsity, a lie, a mirage. The doctrine of extinction refers only to the extinction of illusions; and those sensations and feelings and thoughts which belong to this life of the flesh alone are the illusions which make the complex elusive self. By the total decomposition of this false self, as by a tearing away of veils, the infinite vision comes. There is no soul. The infinite All Soul is the only eternal principle in any being. All the rest is dream. What remains in Nirvana? According to one school of Buddhism, potential identity in the infinite, so that a Buddha, after having reached Nirvana, can return to earth. According to another, identity more than potential, yet not in our sense personal. A Japanese friend says, "I take a piece of gold and say it is one. But this means that it produces on my visual organs a single impression. Really, in the multitude of atoms composing it, each atom is nevertheless distinct and separate, and independent of every other atom. In Buddhahood, even so, are united psychical atoms innumerable. They are one as to condition, yet each has its own independent existence." But in Japan the primitive religion has so affected the common class of Buddhist beliefs that it is not incorrect to speak of the Japanese idea of self. It is only necessary that the popular Shinto idea be simultaneously considered. In Shinto we have the plainest possible evidence of the conception of soul. But this soul is a composite, not a mere bundle of sensations, perceptions, and volitions like the karma being, but a number of souls united to form one ghostly personality. A dead man's ghost may appear as one or as many. It can separate its units, each of which remains capable of a special independent action. Such separation, however, appears to be temporary, the various souls of the composite naturally cohering even after death, and reuniting after any voluntary separation. The vast mass of the Japanese people are both Buddhists and Shintoists; but the primitive beliefs concerning the self are certainly the most powerful, and in the blending of the two faiths remain distinctly recognizable. They have probably supplied to common imagination a natural and easy explanation of the difficulties of the karma doctrine, though to what extent I am not prepared to say. Be it also observed that in the primitive as well as in the Buddhist form of belief, the self is not a principle transmitted from parent to offspring, not an inheritance always dependent upon physiological descent. These facts will indicate how wide is the difference between Eastern ideas and our own upon the subject of the preceding essay. They will also show that any general consideration of the real analogies existing between this strange combination of Far Eastern beliefs and the scientific thought of the 19th century could scarcely be made intelligible by strict philosophical accuracy in the use of terms relating to the idea of self. Indeed, there are no European words capable of rendering the exact meaning of the Buddhist terms belonging to Buddhist idealism. Perhaps it may be regarded as illegitimate to wander from that position so tersely enunciated by Professor Huxley in his essay on Sensation and the Sensiferous Organs. In ultimate analysis it appears that a sensation is the equivalent in terms of consciousness for a mode of motion of the matter of the sensorium. But if inquiry is pushed a stage further, and the question is asked, what then do we know about matter and motion, there is but one reply possible. All we know about motion is that it is a name for certain changes in the relations of our visual, tactile, and muscular sensations; and all we know about matter is that it is the hypothetical substance of physical phenomena, the assumption of which is as pure a piece of metaphysical speculation as is that of a substance of mind. But metaphysical speculation certainly will not cease because of scientific recognition that ultimate truth is beyond the utmost possible range of human knowledge. Rather, for that very reason, it will continue. Perhaps it will never wholly cease. Without it there can be no further modification of religious beliefs, and without modifications there can be no religious progress in harmony with scientific thought. Therefore metaphysical speculation seems to me not only justifiable, but necessary. Whether we accept or deny a substance of mind, whether we imagine thought produced by the play of some unknown element through the cells of the brain, as music is made by the play of wind through the strings of a harp, whether we regard the motion itself as a special mode of vibration inherent in and peculiar to the units of the cerebral structure, still the mystery is infinite, and still Buddhism remains a noble moral working hypothesis in deep accord with the aspirations of mankind and with the laws of ethical progression. Whether we believe or disbelieve in the reality of that which is called the material universe, still the ethical significance of the inexplicable laws of heredity, of the transmission of both racial and personal tendencies in the unspecialized reproductive cell, remains to justify the doctrine of karma. Whatever be that which makes consciousness, its relation to all the past and to all the future is unquestionable. Nor can the doctrine of Nirvana ever cease to command the profound respect of the impartial thinker. Science has found evidence that known substance is not less a product of evolution than mind; that all our so-called elements have been evolved out of one primary, undifferentiated form of matter. And this evidence is startlingly suggestive of some underlying truth in the Buddhist doctrine of emanation and illusion, the evolution of all forms from the formless, of all material phenomena from the immaterial unity, and the ultimate return of all into that state which is empty of lusts, of malice, of dullness, that state in which the excitements of individuality are known no more, and which is therefore designated the void supreme. End of chapter 12. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 13 of Kokoro. Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 13. In Cholera Time. Section 1. China's chief ally in the late war, being deaf and blind, knew nothing and still knows nothing of treaties or of peace. It followed the returning armies of Japan, invaded the victorious empire, and killed about 30,000 people during the hot season. It is still slaying, and the funeral pyres burn continually. Sometimes the smoke and the odor come wind blown into my garden down from the hills behind the town, just to remind me that the cost of burning an adult of my own size is 80 sen, about half a dollar in American money at the present rate of exchange. From the upper balcony of my house the whole length of a Japanese street with its rows of little shops is visible down to the bay. Out of various houses in that street I have seen cholera patients conveyed to the hospital; the last one, only this morning, my neighbor across the way, who kept a porcelain shop. He was removed by force, in spite of the tears and cries of his family. The sanitary law forbids the treatment of cholera in private houses, yet people try to hide their sick in spite of fines and other penalties, because the public cholera hospitals are overcrowded and roughly managed, and the patients are entirely separated from all who love them. But the police are not often deceived; they soon discover unreported cases, and come with litters and coolies. It seems cruel, but sanitary law must be cruel. My neighbor's wife followed the litter crying until the police obliged her to return to her desolate little shop. It is now closed up, and will probably never be opened again by the owners. Such tragedies end as quickly as they begin. The bereaved, so soon as the law allows, remove their pathetic belongings and disappear; and the ordinary life of the street goes on, by day and by night, exactly as if nothing particular had happened. Itinerant vendors, with their bamboo poles and baskets or buckets or boxes, pass the empty houses and utter their accustomed cries. Religious processions go by, chanting fragments of sutras. The blind shampooer blows his melancholy whistle. The private watchman makes his heavy staff boom upon the gutter flags. The boy who sells confectionery still taps his drum, and sings a love song with a plaintive sweet voice like a girl's. You and I together, I remained long, yet in the moment of going I thought I had only just come. You and I together, still I think of the tea. Old or new tea of Uji it might have seemed to others, but to me it was Gyokoro tea, of the beautiful yellow of the Yamabuki flower. You and I together, I am the telegraph operator, you are the one who waits the message, I send my heart and you receive it. What care we now if the post should fall, if the wires be broken? And the children sport as usual. They chase one another with screams and laughter. They dance in chorus. They catch dragonflies and tie them to long strings. They sing burdens of the war about cutting off Chinese heads. Chan chan bozu no kubi o hane. Sometimes a child vanishes, but the survivors continue their play. And this is wisdom. It costs only 44 sen to burn a child. The son of one of my neighbors was burned a few days ago. Little stones with which he used to play lie there in the sun just as he left them. Curious, this child love of stones. Stones are the toys not only of the children of the poor, but of all children at one period of existence. No matter how well supplied with other playthings, every Japanese child wants sometimes to play with stones. To the child mind a stone is a marvelous thing, and ought so to be, since even to the understanding of the mathematician there can be nothing more wonderful than a common stone. The tiny urchin suspects the stone to be much more than it seems, which is an excellent suspicion; and if stupid grown up folk did not untruthfully tell him that his plaything is not worth thinking about, he would never tire of it, and would always be finding something new and extraordinary in it. Only a very great mind could answer all a child's questions about stones. According to popular faith, my neighbor's darling is now playing with small ghostly stones in the dry bed of the River of Souls, wondering perhaps why they cast no shadows. The true poetry in the legend of Sai no Kawara is the absolute naturalness of its principal idea, the phantom continuation of that play which all little Japanese children play with stones. II. The pipe stem seller used to make his round with two large boxes suspended from a bamboo pole balanced upon his shoulder. One box containing stems of various diameters, lengths, and colors, together with tools for fitting them into metal pipes; and the other box containing a baby, his own baby. Sometimes I saw it peeping over the edge of the box and smiling at the passers by. Sometimes I saw it lying, well wrapped up and fast asleep in the bottom of the box. Sometimes I saw it playing with toys. Many people, I was told, used to give it toys. One of the toys bore a curious resemblance to a mortuary tablet, ihai; and this I always observed in the box, whether the child were asleep or awake. The other day I discovered that the pipe stem seller had abandoned his bamboo pole and suspended boxes. He was coming up the street with a little hand cart, just big enough to hold his wares and his baby, and evidently built for that purpose in two compartments. Perhaps the baby had become too heavy for the more primitive method of conveyance. Above the cart fluttered a small white flag, bearing in cursive characters the legend, "Kiseru rao kaya," pipe stems exchanged, and a brief petition for honorable help, "Otasuke onegai The child seemed well and happy; and again I saw the tablet shaped object which had so often attracted my notice before. It was now fastened upright to a high box in the cart, facing the infant's bed. As I watched the cart approaching, I suddenly felt convinced that the tablet was really an ihai. The sun shone full upon it, and there was no mistaking the conventional Buddhist text. This aroused my curiosity, and I asked Manyemon to tell the pipe stem seller that we had a number of pipes needing fresh stems, which was true. Presently the cartlet drew up at our gate, and I went to look at it. The child was not afraid, even of a foreign face. A pretty boy. He lisped and laughed and held out his arms, being evidently used to petting, and while playing with him, I looked closely at the tablet. It was a Shinshu ihai, bearing a woman's kaimyo, or posthumous name. and Manyemon translated the Chinese characters for me: "Revered and of good rank in the mansion of excellence, the 31st day of the 3rd month of the 28th year of Meiji." Meantime a servant had fetched the pipes which needed new stems; and I glanced at the face of the artisan as he worked. It was the face of a man past middle age, with those worn, sympathetic lines about the mouth, dry beds of old smiles, which give to so many Japanese faces an indescribable expression of resigned gentleness. Presently Manyemon began to ask questions; and when Manyemon asks questions, not to reply is possible for the wicked only. Sometimes behind that dear innocent old head I think I see the dawning of an aureole, the aureole of a Bosatsu. The pipe stem seller answered by telling his story. 2 months after the birth of their little boy, his wife had died. In the last hour of her illness she had said: "From what time I die till 3 full years be past, I pray you to leave the child always united with the shadow of me. Never let him be separated from my ihai, so that I may continue to care for him and to nurse him, since thou knowest that he should have the breast for 3 years. This my last asking I entreat thee do not forget." But the mother being dead, the father could not labor as he had been wont to do, and also take care of so young a child, requiring continual attention both night and day, and he was too poor to hire a nurse. So he took to selling pipe stems, as he could thus make a little money without leaving the child even for a minute alone. He could not afford to buy milk, but he had fed the boy for more than a year with rice gruel and ame syrup. I said that the child looked very strong, and none the worse for lack of milk. "That," declared Manyemon, in a tone of conviction bordering on reproof, "is because the dead mother nurses him. How should he want for milk?" And the boy laughed softly, as if conscious of a ghostly caress. Chapter 14. Part 1 of Kokoro. Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. Some Thoughts About Ancestor Worship, Part 1. For 12 leagues, Ananda, around the Sala Grove, there is no spot in size even as the pricking of the point of the tip of a hair which is not pervaded by powerful spirits. The Book of the Great Decease. Section 1. The truth that ancestor worship, in various unobtrusive forms, still survives in some of the most highly civilized countries of Europe, is not so widely known as to preclude the idea that any non-Aryan race actually practicing so primitive a cult must necessarily remain in the primitive stage of religious thought. Critics of Japan have pronounced this hasty judgment, and have professed themselves unable to reconcile the facts of her scientific progress, and the success of her advanced educational system, with the continuance of her ancestor worship. How can the beliefs of Shinto coexist with the knowledge of modern science? How can the men who win distinction as scientific specialists still respect the household shrine or do reverence before the Shinto parish temple? Can all this mean more than the ordered conservation of forms after the departure of faith? Is it not certain that with the further progress of education, Shinto, even as ceremonialism, must cease to exist? Those who put such questions appear to forget that similar questions might be asked about the continuance of any Western faith, and similar doubts expressed as to the possibility of its survival for another century. Really, the doctrines of Shinto are not in the least degree more irreconcilable with modern science than are the doctrines of Orthodox Christianity. Examined with perfect impartiality, I would even venture to say that they are less irreconcilable in more respects than one. They conflict less with our human ideas of justice; and, like the Buddhist doctrine of karma, they offer some very striking analogies with the scientific facts of heredity, analogies which prove Shinto to contain an element of truth as profound as any single element of truth in any of the world's great religions. Stated in the simplest possible form, The peculiar element of truth in Shinto is the belief that the world of the living is directly governed by the world of the dead. That every impulse or act of man is the work of a god, and that all the dead become gods, are the basic ideas of the cult. It must be remembered, however, that the term kami, although translated by the term deity, divinity, or god, has really no such meaning as that which belongs to the English words. It has not even the meaning of those words as referring to the antique beliefs of Greece and Rome. It signifies that which is above, superior, upper, eminent, in the non-religious sense. In the religious sense, it signifies a human spirit having obtained supernatural power after death. The dead are the powers above, the upper ones, the kami. We have here a conception resembling very strongly the modern spiritualistic notion of ghosts, only that the Shinto idea is in no true sense democratic. The kami are ghosts of greatly varying dignity and power, belonging to spiritual hierarchies like the hierarchies of ancient Japanese society. Although essentially superior to the living in certain respects, the living are, nevertheless, able to give them pleasure or displeasure, to gratify or to offend them, even sometimes to ameliorate their spiritual condition. Wherefore posthumous honors are never mockeries, but realities to the Japanese mind. During the present year, for example, several distinguished statesmen and soldiers were raised to higher rank immediately after their death. And I read only the other day in the official gazette that His Majesty has been pleased to posthumously confer the second class of the Order of the Rising Sun upon Major General Baron Yamane, who lately died in Formosa. Such imperial acts must not be regarded only as formalities intended to honor the memory of brave and patriotic men. Neither should they be thought of as intended merely to confer distinction upon the family of the dead. They are essentially of Shinto, and exemplify that intimate sense of relation between the visible and invisible worlds which is the special religious characteristic of Japan among all civilized countries. To Japanese thought the dead are not less real than the living. They take part in the daily life of the people, sharing the humblest sorrows and the humblest joys. They attend the family repasts, watch over the well-being of the household, assist and rejoice in the prosperity of their descendants. They are present at the public pageants, at all the sacred festivals of Shinto, at the military games, and at all the entertainments especially provided for them. And they are universally thought of as finding pleasure in the offerings made to them or the honors conferred upon them. For the purpose of this little essay, it will be sufficient to consider the kami as the spirits of the dead, without making any attempt to distinguish such kami from those primal deities believed to have created the land. With this general interpretation of the term kami, we return then to the great Shinto idea that all the dead still dwell in the world and rule it, influencing not only the thoughts and the acts of men, but the conditions of nature. They direct, wrote Motoori, the changes of the seasons, the wind and the rain, the good and the bad fortunes of states and of individual men. They are, in short, the viewless forces behind all phenomena. Section 2. The most interesting sub-theory of this ancient spiritualism is that which explains the impulses and acts of men as due to the influence of the dead. This hypothesis no modern thinker can declare irrational, since it can claim justification from the scientific doctrine of psychological evolution, according to which each living brain represents the structural work of innumerable dead lives, each character a more or less imperfectly balanced sum of countless dead experiences with good and evil. Unless we deny psychological heredity, we cannot honestly deny that our impulses and feelings and the higher capacities evolved through the feelings have literally been shaped by the dead and bequeathed to us by the dead, and even that the general direction of our mental activities has been determined by the power of the special tendencies bequeathed to us. In such a sense the dead are indeed our kami, and all our actions are truly influenced by them. Figuratively, we may say that every mind is a world of ghosts, ghosts incomparably more numerous than the acknowledged millions of the higher Shinto kami and that the spectral population of one grain of brain matter more than realizes the wildest fancies of the medieval schoolmen about the number of angels able to stand on the point of a needle. Scientifically we know that within one tiny living cell may be stored up the whole life of a race, the sum of all the past sensations of millions of years, perhaps even, who knows, of millions of dead planets. But devils would not be inferior to angels in the mere power of congregating upon the point of a needle. What of bad men and of bad acts in this theory of Shinto? Motoori made answer: "Whenever anything goes wrong in the world, it is to be attributed to the action of the evil gods, called the gods of crookedness, whose power is so great that the Sun Goddess and the Creator God are sometimes powerless to restrain them; much less are human beings always able to resist their influence. The prosperity of the wicked and the misfortunes of the good, which seem opposed to ordinary justice, are thus explained. All bad acts are due to the influence of evil deities; and evil men may become evil kami. There are no self contradictions in this simplest of cults, nothing complicated or hard to be understood." Footnote 1: I am considering only the pure Shinto belief as expounded by Shinto scholars; but it may be necessary to remind the reader that both Buddhism and Shintoism are blended in Japan, not only with each other, but with Chinese ideas of various kinds. It is doubtful whether the pure Shinto ideas now exist in their original form in popular belief. We are not quite clear as to the doctrine of multiple souls in Shinto, whether the psychical combination was originally thought of as dissolved by death. My own opinion, the result of investigation in different parts of Japan, is that the multiple soul was formerly believed to remain multiple after death. Footnote 1: It is not certain that all men guilty of bad actions necessarily become gods of crookedness, for reasons hereafter to be seen; but all men, good or bad, become kami, or influences; and all evil acts are the results of evil influences. Now this teaching is in accord with certain facts of heredity. Our best faculties are certainly bequests from the best of our ancestors. Our evil qualities are inherited from natures in which evil, or that which we now call evil, once predominated. The ethical knowledge evolved within us by civilization demands that we strengthen the high powers bequeathed us by the best experience of our dead, and diminish the force of the baser tendencies we inherit. We are under obligation to reverence and to obey our good kami, and to strive against our gods of crookedness. The knowledge of the existence of both is old as human reason. In some form or other, the doctrine of evil and of good spirits in personal attendance upon every soul is common to most of the great religions. Our own medieval faith developed the idea to a degree which must leave an impress on our language for all time; yet the faith in guardian angels and tempting demons evolutionarily represents only the development of a cult once simple as the religion of the kami. And this theory of medieval faith is likewise pregnant with truth. The white winged form that whispered good into the right ear, the black shape that murmured evil into the left, do not indeed walk beside the man of the 19th century, but they dwell within his brain, and he knows their voices and feels their urging as well and as often as did his ancestors of the Middle Ages. The modern ethical objection to Shinto is that both good and evil kami are to be respected. Just as the Mikado worshipped the gods of heaven and of earth, so his people prayed to the good gods in order to obtain blessings, and performed rites in honor of the bad gods to avert their displeasure. As there are bad as well as good gods, it is necessary to propitiate them with offerings of agreeable food, with the playing of harps and the blowing of flutes, with singing and dancing, and with whatever else is likely to put them in good humor. As a matter of fact, in modern Japan, the evil kami appear to receive few offerings or honors, notwithstanding this express declaration that they are to be propitiated. But it will now be obvious why the early missionaries characterized such a cult as devil worship, although, to Shinto imagination, the idea of a devil, in the Western meaning of the word, never took shape. The seeming weakness of the doctrine is in the teaching that evil spirits are not to be warred upon, a teaching essentially repellent to Roman Catholic feeling. But between the evil spirits of Christian and of Shinto belief there is a vast difference. The evil Kami is only the ghost of a dead man, and is not believed to be altogether evil, since propitiation is possible. The conception of absolute unmixed evil is not of the Far East. Absolute evil is certainly foreign to human nature, and therefore impossible in human ghosts. The evil Kami are not devils: they are simply ghosts who influence the passions of men, and only in this sense the deities of the passions. Now Shinto is of all religions the most natural, and therefore in certain respects the most rational. It does not consider the passions necessarily evil in themselves, but evil only according to cause, conditions, and degrees of their indulgence. Being ghosts, the gods are altogether human, having the various good and bad qualities of men in varying proportions. The majority are good, and the sum of the influence of all is toward good rather than evil. To appreciate the rationality of this view requires a tolerably high opinion of mankind, such an opinion as the conditions of the old society of Japan might have justified. No pessimist could profess pure Shintoism. The doctrine is optimistic; and whoever has a generous faith in humanity will have no fault to find with the absence of the idea of implacable evil from its teaching. Now, it is just in the recognition of the necessity for propitiating the evil ghosts that the ethically rational character of Shinto reveals itself. Ancient experience and modern knowledge unite in warning us against the deadly error of trying to extirpate or to paralyze certain tendencies in human nature, tendencies which, if morbidly cultivated or freed from all restraint, lead to folly, to crime, and to countless social evils. The animal passions, the ape and tiger impulses, antedate human society, and are the accessories to nearly all crimes committed against it. But they cannot be killed, and they cannot be safely starved. Any attempt to extirpate them would signify also an effort to destroy some of the very highest emotional faculties with which they remain inseparably blended. The primitive impulses cannot even be numbed save at the cost of intellectual and emotional powers, which give to human life all its beauty and all its tenderness, but which are nevertheless deeply rooted in the archaic soil of passion. The highest in us had its beginnings in the lowest. Asceticism, by warring against the natural feelings, has created monsters. Theological legislation, irrationally directed against human weaknesses, has only aggravated social disorders; and laws against pleasure have only provoked debaucheries. The history of morals teaches very plainly indeed that our bad Kami require some propitiation. The passions still remain more powerful than the reason in man, because they are incomparably older, because they were once all essential to self-preservation, because they made that primal stratum of consciousness out of which the nobler sentiments have slowly grown. Never can they be suffered to rule, but woe to whosoever would deny their immemorial rights. Section 3. Out of these primitive, but, as may now be perceived, not irrational beliefs about the dead, there have been evolved moral sentiments unknown to Western civilization. These are well worth considering, as they will prove in harmony with the most advanced conception of ethics, and especially with that immense though yet indefinite expansion of the sense of duty which has followed upon the understanding of evolution. I do not know that we have any reason to congratulate ourselves upon the absence from our lives of the sentiments in question. I am even inclined to think that we may yet find it morally necessary to cultivate sentiments of the same kind. One of the surprises of our future will certainly be a return to beliefs and ideas long ago abandoned upon the mere assumption that they contain no truth, beliefs still called barbarous, pagan, medieval, by those who condemn them out of traditional habit. Year after year the researches of science afford us new proof that the savage, the barbarian, the idolater, the monk, each and all have arrived by different paths as near to some one point of eternal truth as any thinker of the 19th century. We are now learning also that the theories of the astrologers and of the alchemists were but partially, not totally, wrong. We have reason even to suppose that no dream of the invisible world has ever been dreamed, that no hypothesis of the unseen has ever been imagined, which future science will not prove to have contained some germ of reality. Foremost among the moral sentiments of Shinto is that of loving gratitude to the past, a sentiment having no real correspondence in our own emotional life. We know our past better than the Japanese know theirs. We have myriads of books recording or considering its every incident and condition; but we cannot in any sense be said to love it or to feel grateful to it. Critical recognitions of its merits and of its defects, some rare enthusiasms excited by its beauties, many strong denunciations of its mistakes, these represent the sum of our thoughts and feelings about it. The attitude of our scholarship in reviewing it is necessarily cold; that of our art often more than generous; that of our religion condemnatory for the most part. Whatever the point of view from which we study it, our attention is mainly directed to the work of the dead, either the visible work that makes our hearts beat a little faster than usual while looking at it, or the results of their thoughts and deeds in relation to the society of their time. Of past humanity as unity, of the millions long buried as real kindred, we either think not at all, or think only with the same sort of curiosity that we give to the subject of extinct races. We do indeed find interest in the record of some individual lives that have left large marks in history. Our emotions are stirred by the memories of great captains, statesmen, discoverers, reformers; but only because the magnitude of that which they accomplished appeals to our own ambitions, desires, egotisms, and not at all to our altruistic sentiments in 99 cases out of 100. The nameless dead to whom we owe most we do not trouble ourselves about; we feel no gratitude, no love to them. We even find it difficult to persuade ourselves that the love of ancestors can possibly be a real, powerful, penetrating, life moulding religious emotion in any form of human society, which it certainly is in Japan. The mere idea is utterly foreign to our ways of thinking, feeling, acting. A partial reason for this, of course, is that we have no common faith in the existence of an active spiritual relation between our ancestors and ourselves. If we happen to be irreligious, we do not believe in ghosts. If we are profoundly religious, we think of the dead as removed from us by judgment, as absolutely separated from us during the period of our lives. It is true that among the peasantry of Roman Catholic countries there still exists a belief that the dead are permitted to return to earth once a year, on the night of All Souls. But even according to this belief they are not considered as related to the living by any stronger bond than memory; and they are thought of, as our collections of folklore bear witness, rather with fear than love. In Japan the feeling toward the dead is utterly different. It is a feeling of grateful and reverential love. It is probably the most profound and powerful of the emotions of the race, that which especially directs national life and shapes national character. Patriotism belongs to it; filial piety depends upon it; family love is rooted in it; loyalty is based upon it. The soldier who, to make a path for his comrades through the battle, deliberately flings away his life with a shout of Teikoku manzai, the son or daughter who unmurmuring sacrifices all the happiness of existence for the sake, perhaps, of an undeserving or even cruel parent; the partisan who gives up friends, family, and fortune rather than break the verbal promise made in other years to a now poverty-stricken master; the wife who ceremoniously robes herself in white, utters a prayer, and thrusts a sword into her throat to atone for a wrong done to strangers by her husband, all these obey the will and hear the approval of invisible witnesses. Even among the skeptical students of the new generation this feeling survives many wrecks of faith, and the old sentiments are still uttered: never must we cause shame to our ancestors. It is our duty to give honor to our ancestors. During my former engagement as a teacher of English, it happened more than once that ignorance of the real meaning behind such phrases prompted me to change them in written composition. I would suggest, for example, that the expression "to do honor to the memory of our ancestors" was more correct than the phrase given. I remember one day even attempting to explain why we ought not to speak of ancestors exactly as if they were living parents. Perhaps my pupils suspected me of trying to meddle with their beliefs; for the Japanese never think of an ancestor as having become only a memory. Their dead are alive. Were there suddenly to arise within us the absolute certainty that our dead are still with us, seeing every act, knowing our every thought, hearing each word we utter, able to feel sympathy with us or anger against us, able to help us and delighted to receive our help, able to love us and greatly needing our love, it is quite certain that our conceptions of life and duty would be vastly changed. We should have to recognize our obligations to the past in a very solemn way. Now, with the man of the Far East, the constant presence of the dead has been a matter of conviction for thousands of years. He speaks to them daily; he tries to give them happiness; and, unless a professional criminal, he never quite forgets his duty towards them. No one, says Hirata, who constantly discharges that duty will ever be disrespectful to the gods or to his living parents. Such a man will also be loyal to his friends, and kind and gentle with his wife and children; for the essence of this devotion is in truth filial piety. And it is in this sentiment that the secret of much strange feeling in Japanese character must be sought. Far more foreign to our world of sentiment than the splendid courage with which death is faced, or the equanimity with which the most trying sacrifices are made, is the simple, deep emotion of the boy who, in the presence of a Shinto shrine never seen before, suddenly feels the tears spring to his eyes. He is conscious in that moment of what we never emotionally recognize, the prodigious debt of the present to the past, and the duty of love to the dead. End of chapter 14, part 1. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 14, part 2 of Kokoro. Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 14. Some Thoughts about Ancestor Worship, Part 2. Section 4. If we think a little about our position as debtors, and our way of accepting that position, one striking difference between Western and Far Eastern moral sentiment will become manifest. There is nothing more awful than the mere fact of life as mystery, when that fact first rushes fully into consciousness. Out of unknown darkness we rise a moment into sunlight, look about us, rejoice and suffer, pass on the vibration of our being to other beings, and fall back again into darkness. So a wave rises, catches the light, transmits its motion, and sinks back into sea. So a plant ascends from clay, unfolds its leaves to light and air, flowers, seeds, and becomes clay again. Only the wave has no knowledge, the plant has no perceptions. Each human life seems no more than a parabolic curve of motion out of earth and back to earth. But in that brief interval of change it perceives the universe. The awfulness of the phenomenon is that nobody knows anything about it. No mortal can explain this most common yet most incomprehensible of all facts, life in itself. Yet every mortal who can think has been obliged betimes to think about it in relation to self. I come out of mystery. I see the sky and the land, men and women and their works, and I know that I must return to mystery. And merely what this means, not even the greatest of philosophers, not even Mr. Herbert Spencer, can tell me. We are all of us riddles to ourselves and riddles to each other, and space and motion and time are riddles, and matter is a riddle. About the before and the after, neither the newly born nor the dead have any message for us. The child is dumb. The skull only grins. Nature has no consolation for us. Out of her formlessness issue forms which return to formlessness. That is all. The plant becomes clay. The clay becomes a plant. When the plant turns to clay, what becomes of the vibration which was its life? Does it go on existing viewlessly, like the forces that shape specters of frondage in the frost upon a window pane? Within the horizon circle of the infinite enigma, countless lesser enigmas, old as the world, awaited the coming of man. Oedipus had to face one sphinx: humanity, thousands of thousands, all crouching among bones along the path of time, and each with a deeper and a harder riddle. All the sphinxes have not been satisfied. Myriads line the way of the future to devour lives yet unborn. But millions have been answered. We are now able to exist without perpetual horror, because of the relative knowledge that guides us, the knowledge won out of the jaws of destruction. All our knowledge is bequeathed knowledge. The dead have left us record of all they were able to learn about themselves and the world, about the laws of death and life, about things to be acquired and things to be avoided, about ways of making existence less painful than nature willed it, about right and wrong and sorrow and happiness, about the error of selfishness, the wisdom of kindness, the obligation of sacrifice. They left us information of everything they could find out concerning climates and seasons and places, the sun and moon and stars, the motions and the composition of the universe. They bequeathed us also their delusions, which long served the good purpose of saving us from falling into greater ones. They left us the story of their errors and efforts, their triumphs and failures, their pains and joys, their loves and hates, for warning or example. They expected our sympathy, because they toiled with the kindest wishes and hopes for us, and because they made our world. They cleared the land, they extirpated monsters, they tamed and taught the animals most useful to us. The mother of Kullervo awoke within her tomb, and from the deeps of the dust she cried to him, "I have left thee the dog tied to a tree, that thou mayest go with him to the chase." They domesticated likewise the useful trees and plants, and they discovered the places and the powers of the metals. Later they created all that we call civilization, trusting us to correct such mistakes as they could not help making. The sum of their toil is incalculable, and all that they have given us ought surely to be very sacred, very precious, if only by reason of the infinite pain and thought which it cost. Yet what Occidental dreams of saying daily, like the Shinto believer, "Ye forefathers of the generations, and of our families, and of our kindred, unto you, the founders of our homes, we utter the gladness of our thanks"? None. It is not only because we think the dead cannot hear, but because we have not been trained for generations to exercise our powers of sympathetic mental representation except within a very narrow circle, the family circle. The Occidental family circle is a very small affair indeed compared with the Oriental family circle. In this 19th century the Occidental family is almost disintegrated. It practically means little more than husband, wife, and children well under age. The Oriental family means not only parents and their blood kindred, but grandparents and their kindred, and great grandparents, and all the dead behind them. This idea of the family cultivates sympathetic representation to such a degree that the range of the emotion belonging to such representation may extend, as in Japan, to many groups and subgroups of living families, and even, in time of national peril, to the whole nation as one great family, a feeling much deeper than what we call patriotism. As a religious emotion the feeling is infinitely extended to all the past. The blended sense of love, of loyalty, and of gratitude is not less real, though necessarily more vague, than the feeling to living kindred. In the West, after the destruction of antique society, no such feeling could remain. The beliefs that condemned the ancients to hell and forbade the praise of their works, the doctrine that trained us to return thanks for everything to the God of the Hebrews, created habits of thought and habits of thoughtlessness, both inimical to every feeling of gratitude to the past. Then, with the decay of theology and the dawn of larger knowledge, came the teaching that the dead had no choice in their work. They had obeyed necessity, and we had only received from them of necessity the results of necessity. And today we still fail to recognize that the necessity itself ought to compel our sympathies with those who obeyed it, and that its bequeathed results are as pathetic as they are precious. Such thoughts rarely occur to us even in regard to the work of the living who serve us. We consider the cost of a thing purchased or obtained to ourselves. about its cost and effort to the producer we do not allow ourselves to think. Indeed, we should be laughed at for any exhibition of conscience on the subject. And our equal insensibility to the pathetic meaning of the work of the past and to that of the work of the present largely explains the wastefulness of our civilization, the reckless consumption by luxury of the labor of years in the pleasure of an hour, the inhumanity of the thousands of unthinking rich, each of whom dissipates yearly in the gratification of totally unnecessary wants the price of 100 human lives. The cannibals of civilization are unconsciously more cruel than those of savagery, and require much more flesh. The deeper humanity, the cosmic emotion of humanity, is essentially the enemy of useless luxury, and essentially opposed to any form of society which places no restraints upon the gratifications of sense or the pleasures of egotism. In the Far East, on the other hand, the moral duty of simplicity of life has been taught from very ancient times, because ancestor worship had developed and cultivated this cosmic emotion of humanity which we lack, but which we shall certainly be obliged to acquire at a later day, simply to save ourselves from extermination. Two sayings of Ieyasu exemplify the Oriental sentiment. When virtually master of the empire, this greatest of Japanese soldiers and statesmen was seen one day cleaning and smoothing with his own hands an old dusty pair of silk hakama or trousers. "What you see me do," he said to a retainer, "I am not doing because I think of the worth of the garment in itself, but because I think of what it needed to produce it. It is the result of the toil of a poor woman, and that is why I value it. If we do not think, while using things, of the time and effort required to make them, then our want of consideration puts us on a level with the beasts." Again, in the days of his greatest wealth, we hear of him rebuking his wife for wishing to furnish him too often with new clothing. "When I think," he protested, "of the multitudes around me, and of the generations to come after me, I feel it my duty to be very sparing for their sake of the goods in my possession." Nor has this spirit of simplicity yet departed from Japan. Even the Emperor and Empress, in the privacy of their own apartments, continue to live as simply as their subjects, and devote most of their revenue to the alleviation of public distress. Section 5. It is through the teachings of evolution that there will ultimately be developed in the West a moral recognition of duty to the past like that which ancestor worship created in the Far East. For even today, whoever has mastered the first principles of the new philosophy cannot look at the commonest product of man's handiwork without perceiving something of its evolutional history. The most ordinary utensil will appear to him not the mere product of individual capacity on the part of carpenter or potter, smith or cutler, but the product of experiment continued through thousands of years with methods, with materials, and with forms. Nor will it be possible for him to consider the vast time and toil necessitated in the evolution of any mechanical appliance, and yet experience no generous sentiment. Coming generations must think of the material bequests of the past in relation to dead humanity. But in the development of this cosmic emotion of humanity, a much more powerful factor than recognition of our material indebtedness to the past will be the recognition of our psychical indebtedness. For we owe to the dead our immaterial world also, the world that lives within us, the world of all that is lovable in impulse, emotion, thought. Whosoever understands scientifically what human goodness is, and the terrible cost of making it, can find in the commonest phases of the humblest lives that beauty which is divine, and can feel that in one sense our dead are truly gods. So long as we suppose the woman's soul, one in itself, was something specially created to fit one particular physical being, the beauty and the wonder of mother love could never be fully revealed to us. But with deeper knowledge we must perceive that the inherited love of myriads of millions of dead mothers has been treasured up in one life; that only thus can be interpreted the infinite sweetness of the speech which the infant hears, the infinite tenderness of the look of caress which meets its gaze. Unhappy the mortal who has not known these; yet what mortal can adequately speak of them? Truly is mother love divine; for everything by human recognition called divine is summed up in that love. and every woman uttering and transmitting its highest expression is more than the mother of man: she is the Mater Dei. Needless to speak here about the ghostliness of first love, sexual love, which is illusion, because the passion and the beauty of the dead revive in it, to dazzle, to delude, and to bewitch. It is very, very wonderful, but it is not all good, because it is not all true. The real charm of woman in herself is that which comes later, when all the illusions fade away to reveal a reality lovelier than any illusion, which has been evolving behind the phantom curtain of them. What is the divine magic of the woman thus perceived? Only the affection, the sweetness, the faith, the unselfishness, the intuitions of millions of buried hearts. All live again, all throb anew, in every fresh, warm beat of her own. Certain amazing faculties exhibited in the highest social life tell in another way the story of soul structure built up by dead lives. Wonderful is the man who can really be all things to all men, or the woman who can make herself 20, 50, 100 different women, comprehending all, penetrating all, unerring to estimate all others, seeming to have no individual self, but only selves innumerable, able to meet each varying personality with a soul exactly toned to the tone of that to be encountered. Rare these characters are, but not so rare that the traveller is unlikely to meet one or two of them in any cultivated society which he has a chance of studying. They are essentially multiple beings, so visibly multiple that even those who think of the ego as single have to describe them as highly complex. Nevertheless, this manifestation of 40 or 50 different characters in the same person is a phenomenon so remarkable, especially remarkable because it is commonly manifested in youth long before relative experience could possibly account for it, that I cannot but wonder how few persons frankly realize its signification. So likewise with what have been termed the intuitions of some forms of genius, particularly those which relate to the representation of the emotions. A Shakespeare would always remain incomprehensible on the ancient soul theory. Taine attempted to explain him by the phrase "a perfect imagination," and the phrase reaches far in the truth. But what is the meaning of a perfect imagination? Enormous multiplicity of soul life, countless past existences revived in one. Nothing else can explain it. It is not, however, in the world of pure intellect that the story of psychical complexity is most admirable. It is in the world which speaks to our simplest emotions of love, honor, sympathy, heroism. But by such a theory, some critic may observe, the source of impulses to heroism is also the source of the impulses that people jails. Both are of the dead. This is true. We inherited evil as well as good. Being composites only, still evolving, still becoming, we inherit imperfections. But the survival of the fittest in impulses is certainly proven by the average moral condition of humanity, using the word fittest in its ethical sense. In spite of all the misery and vice and crime, nowhere so terribly developed as under our own so-called Christian civilization. The fact must be patent to any one who has lived much, traveled much, and thought much, that the mass of humanity is good, and therefore that the vast majority of impulses bequeathed us by past humanity is good. Also it is certain that the more normal a social condition, the better its humanity. Through all the past, the good kami have always managed to keep the bad kami from controlling the world. And with the acceptation of this truth, our future ideas of wrong and of right must take immense expansion. Just as a heroism, or any act of pure goodness for a noble end, must assume a preciousness heretofore unsuspected, so a real crime must come to be regarded as a crime less against the existing individual or society than against the sum of human experience, and the whole past struggle of ethical aspiration. Real goodness will, therefore, be more prized, and real crime less leniently judged. And the early Shinto teaching that no code of ethics is necessary, that the right rule of human conduct can always be known by consulting the heart, is a teaching which will doubtless be accepted by a more perfect humanity than that of the present. Section 6. Evolution, the reader may say, does indeed show through its doctrine of heredity that the living are in one sense really controlled by the dead. But it also shows that the dead are within us, not without us. They are part of us. There is no proof that they have any existence which is not our own. Gratitude to the past would therefore be gratitude to ourselves. Love of the dead would be self-love. So that your attempt at analogy ends in the absurd. No. Ancestor worship in its primitive form may be a symbol only of truth. It may be an index or foreshadowing only of the new moral duty which larger knowledge must force upon us, the duty of reverence and obedience to the sacrificial past of human ethical experience. But it may also be much more. The facts of heredity can never afford but half an explanation of the facts of psychology. A plant produces 10, 20, 100 plants without yielding up its own life in the process. An animal gives birth to many young, yet lives on with all its physical capacities and its small powers of thought undiminished. Children are born, and the parents survive them. Inherited the mental life certainly is, not less than the physical. Yet the reproductive cells, the least specialized of all cells, whether in plant or in animal, never take away, but only repeat the parental being. Continually multiplying, each conveys and transmits the whole experience of a race, yet leaves the whole experience of the race behind it. Here is the marvel inexplicable, the self-multiplication of physical and psychical being, life after life thrown off from the parent life, each to become complete and reproductive. Were all the parental life given to the offspring, heredity might be said to favor the doctrine of materialism. But like the deities of Hindu legend, the self multiplies and still remains the same, with full capacities for continued multiplication. Shinto has its doctrine of souls multiplying by fission. But the facts of psychological emanation are infinitely more wonderful than any theory. The great religions have recognized that heredity could not explain the whole question of self, could not account for the fate of the original residual self. So they have generally united in holding the inner independent of the outer being. Science can no more fully decide the issues they have raised than it can decide the nature of reality in itself. Again we may vainly ask, what becomes of the forces which constituted the vitality of a dead plant? Much more difficult the question, what becomes of the sensations which form the psychical life of a dead man, since nobody can explain the simplest sensation. We know only that during life certain active forces within the body of the plant or the body of the man adjusted themselves continually to outer forces, and that after the interior forces could no longer respond to the pressure of the exterior forces, then the body in which the former were stored was dissolved into the elements out of which it had been built up. We know nothing more of the ultimate nature of those elements than we know of the ultimate nature of the tendencies which united them. But we have more right to believe the ultimates of life persist after the dissolution of the forms they created than to believe they cease. The theory of spontaneous generation misnamed, for only in a qualified sense can the term spontaneous be applied to the theory of the beginnings of mundane life is a theory which the evolutionist must accept, and which can frighten none aware of the evidence of chemistry that matter itself is in evolution. The real theory, not the theory of organized life beginning in bottled infusions, but of the life primordial arising upon a planetary surface, has enormous, nay infinite spiritual significance. It requires the belief that all potentialities of life and thought and emotion pass from nebula to universe, from system to system, from star to planet or moon, and again back to cyclonic storms of atomicity. It means that tendencies survive sunburnings, survive all cosmic evolutions and disintegrations. The elements are evolutionary products only, and the difference of universe from universe must be the creation of tendencies, of a form of heredity too vast and complex for imagination. There is no chance. There is only law. Each fresh evolution must be influenced by previous evolutions, just as each individual human life is influenced by the experience of all the lives in its ancestral chain. Must not the tendencies even of the ancestral forms of matter be inherited by the forms of matter to come? And may not the acts and thoughts of men even now be helping to shape the character of future worlds? No longer is it possible to say that the dreams of the alchemists were absurdities, and no longer can we even assert that all material phenomena are not determined, as in the thought of the ancient East, by soul polarities. Whether our dead do or do not continue to dwell without us as well as within us, a question not to be decided in our present undeveloped state of comparative blindness, certain it is that the testimony of cosmic facts accords with one weird belief of Shinto, the belief that all things are determined by the dead, whether by ghosts of men or ghosts of worlds. Even as our personal lives are ruled by the now viewless lives of the past, so doubtless the life of our earth, and of the system to which it belongs, is ruled by ghosts of spheres innumerable, dead universes, dead suns and planets and moons, as forms long since dissolved into the night, but as forces immortal and eternally working. Back to the sun, indeed, like the Shintoist, we can trace our descent. Yet we know that even there the beginning of us was not. Infinitely more remote in time than a million sun lives was that beginning, if it can truly be said there was a beginning. The teaching of evolution is that we are one with that unknown ultimate, of which matter and human mind are but ever changing manifestations. The teaching of evolution is also that each of us is many, yet that all of us are still one with each other and with the cosmos; that we must know all past humanity not only in ourselves, but likewise in the preciousness and beauty of every fellow life; that we can best love ourselves in others; that we shall best serve ourselves in others; that forms are but veils and phantoms; and that to the formless Infinite alone really belong all human emotions, whether of the living or the dead. End of Chapter 14. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 15 of Kokoro. Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 15. Kimiko. Wasuraruru minaran to omo kokoro koso wasurenu yorimo omoi narikere. To wish to be forgotten by the beloved is a soul task harder far than trying not to forget. Poem by Kimiko. Section 1. The name is on a paper lantern at the entrance of a house in the street of the Geisha. Seen at night, the street is one of the queerest in the world. It is narrow as a gangway, and the dark shining woodwork of the house fronts, all tightly closed, each having a tiny sliding door with paper panes that look just like frosted glass, makes you think of first class passenger cabins. Really the buildings are several stories high, but you do not observe this at once, especially if there be no moon, because only the lower stories are illuminated up to their awnings, above which all is darkness. The illumination is made by lamps behind the narrow paper paned doors, and by the paper lanterns hanging outside, one at every door. You look down the street between two lines of these lanterns, lines converging far off into one motionless bar of yellow light. Some of the lanterns are egg shaped, some cylindrical, others four sided or six sided, and Japanese characters are beautifully written upon them. The street is very quiet, silent as a display of cabinet work in some great exhibition after closing time. This is because the inmates are mostly away, at tending banquets and other festivities. Their life is of the night. The legend upon the first lantern to the left as you go south is Kinoya Uchi Okata, and that means the house of gold wherein Okata dwells. The lantern to the right tells of the house of Nishimura, and of a girl Miyotsuru, which name signifies the stork magnificently existing. Next upon the left comes the house of Kajita, and in that house are Kohana, the flower bud, and Hinako, whose face is pretty as the face of a doll. Opposite is the house Nagaye, wherein live Kimika and Kimiko; and this luminous double litany of names is half a mile long. The inscription on the lantern of the last named house reveals the relationship between Kimika and Kimiko, and yet something more, for Kimiko is styled Nidaime, an honorary untranslatable title which signifies that she is only Kimiko No. 2. Kimika is the teacher and mistress. She has educated two geisha, both named, or rather renamed, by her Kimiko. And this use of the same name twice is proof positive that the first Kimiko, Ichidaime, must have been celebrated. The professional appellation borne by an unlucky or unsuccessful geisha is never given to her successor. If you should ever have good and sufficient reason to enter the house, pushing open that lantern slide of a door which sets a gong bell ringing to announce visits, you might be able to see Kimika, provided her little troupe be not engaged for the evening. You would find her a very intelligent person and well worth talking to. She can tell, when she pleases, the most remarkable stories, real flesh and blood stories, true stories of human nature. For the street of the geisha is full of traditions, tragic, comic, melodramatic. Every house has its memories, and Kimika knows them all. Some are very, very terrible, and some would make you laugh, and some would make you think. The story of the first Kimiko belongs to the last class. It is not one of the most extraordinary, but it is one of the least difficult for Western people to understand. II. There is no more Ichidaime Kimiko. She is only a remembrance. Kimika was quite young when she called that Kimiko her professional sister. An exceedingly wonderful girl is what Kimika says of Kimiko. To win any renown in her profession, a geisha must be pretty or very clever, and the famous ones are usually both, having been selected at a very early age by their trainers according to the promise of such qualities. Even the commoner class of singing girls must have some charm in their best years, if only that beauté du diable which inspired the Japanese proverb that even a devil is pretty at 18. Footnote 1: Oni mo ju hachi azami no hana. There is a similar saying of a dragon, Jamo hatachi, even a dragon at 20. End footnote 1. But Kimiko was much more than pretty. She was according to the Japanese ideal of beauty, and that standard is not reached by one woman in 100,000. Also, she was more than clever, she was accomplished. She composed very dainty poems, could arrange flowers exquisitely, perform tea ceremonies faultlessly, embroider, make silk mosaic, in short, she was genteel; and her first public appearance made a flutter in the fast world of Kyoto. It was evident that she could make almost any conquest she pleased, and that fortune was before her. But it soon became evident also that she had been perfectly trained for her profession. She had been taught how to conduct herself under almost any possible circumstances; for what she could not have known, Kimika knew everything about: the power of beauty and the weakness of passion, the craft of promises and the worth of indifference, and all the folly and evil in the hearts of men. So Kimiko made few mistakes and shed few tears. By and by she proved to be, as Kimika wished, slightly dangerous. So a lamp is to night flyers; otherwise some of them would put it out. The duty of the lamp is to make pleasant things visible; it has no malice. Kimiko had no malice, and was not too dangerous. Anxious parents discovered that she did not want to enter into respectable families, nor even to lend herself to any serious romances. But she was not particularly merciful to that class of youths who sign documents with their own blood, and ask a dancing girl to cut off the extreme end of the little finger of her left hand as a pledge of eternal affection. She was mischievous enough with them to cure them of their folly. Some rich folks who offered her lands and houses on condition of owning her body and soul found her less merciful. One proved generous enough to purchase her freedom unconditionally at a price which made Kimika a rich woman, and Kimiko was grateful, but she remained a geisha. She managed her rebuffs with too much tact to excite hate, and knew how to heal despairs in most cases. There were exceptions, of course. One old man, who thought life not worth living unless he could get Kimiko all to himself, invited her to a banquet one evening, and asked her to drink wine with him. But Kimika, accustomed to read faces, deftly substituted tea, which has precisely the same color, for Kimiko's wine, and so instinctively saved the girl's precious life. For only 10 minutes later the soul of the silly host was on its way to the Meido alone, and doubtless greatly disappointed. After that night Kimika watched over Kimiko as a wild cat guards her kitten. The kitten became a fashionable mania, a craze, a delirium, one of the great sights and sensations of the period. There is a foreign prince who remembers her name; he sent her a gift of diamonds which she never wore. Other presents in multitude she received from all who could afford the luxury of pleasing her; and to be in her good graces, even for a day, was the ambition of the gilded youth. Nevertheless, she allowed no one to imagine himself a special favorite, and refused to make any contracts for perpetual affection. To any protests on the subject she answered that she knew her place. Even respectable women spoke not unkindly of her, because her name never figured in any story of family unhappiness. She really kept her place. Time seemed to make her more charming. Other geisha grew into fame, but no one was even classed with her. Some manufacturers secured the sole right to use her photograph for a label, and that label made a fortune for the firm. But one day the startling news was abroad that Kimiko had at last shown a very soft heart. She had actually said good bye to Kimika, and had gone away with somebody able to give her all the pretty dresses she could wish for, somebody eager to give her social position also, and to silence gossip about her naughty past, somebody willing to die for her 10 times over, and already half dead for love of her. Kimika said that a fool had tried to kill himself because of Kimiko, and that Kimiko had taken pity on him and nursed him back to foolishness. Taiko Hideyoshi had said that there were only two things in this world which he feared, a fool and a dark night. Kimika had always been afraid of a fool, and a fool had taken Kimiko away. And she added with not unselfish tears that Kimiko would never come back to her. It was a case of love on both sides for the time of several existences. Nevertheless, Kimiko was only half right. She was very shrewd indeed; but she had never been able to see into certain private chambers in the soul of Kimiko. If she could have seen, she would have screamed for astonishment. III Between Kimiko and other geisha there was a difference of gentle blood. Before she took a professional name, her name was Ai, which, written with the proper character, means love. Written with another character, the same word sound signifies grief. The story of Ai was a story of both grief and love. She had been nicely brought up. As a child she had been sent to a private school kept by an old samurai, where the little girls squatted on cushions before little writing tables 12 inches high, and where the teachers taught without salary. In these days, when teachers get better salaries than civil service officials, the teaching is not nearly so honest or so pleasant as it used to be. A servant always accompanied the child to and from the schoolhouse, carrying her books, her writing box, her kneeling cushion, and her little table. Afterwards she attended an elementary public school. The first modern textbooks had just been issued, containing Japanese translations of English, German, and French stories about honor and duty and heroism, excellently chosen, and illustrated with tiny, innocent pictures of Western people in costumes never of this world. Those dear, pathetic little textbooks are now curiosities. They have long been superseded by pretentious compilations, much less lovingly and sensibly edited. Ai learned well. Once a year, at examination time, a great official would visit the school, and talk to the children as if they were all his own, and stroke each silky head as he distributed the prizes. He is now a retired statesman, and has doubtless forgotten Ai; and in the schools of today nobody caresses little girls, or gives them prizes. Then came those reconstructive changes by which families of rank were reduced to obscurity and poverty, and Ai had to leave school. Many great sorrows followed, till there remained to her only her mother and an infant sister. The mother and Ai could do little but weave, and by weaving alone they could not earn enough to live. House and lands first; then article by article all things not necessary to existence, heirlooms, trinkets, costly robes, crested lacquer ware, passed cheaply to those whom misery makes rich, and whose wealth is called by the people Namida no Kane, the money of tears. Help from the living was scanty, for most of the samurai families of kin were in like distress. But when there was nothing left to sell, not even Ai's little school books, help was sought from the dead. For it was remembered that the father of Ai's father had been buried with his sword, the gift of a daimyo, and that the mountings of the weapon were of gold. So the grave was opened, and the grand hilt of curious workmanship exchanged for a common one, and the ornaments of the lacquered sheath removed. But the good blade was not taken, because the warrior might need it. Ai saw his face as he sat erect in the great red clay urn which served in lieu of coffin to the samurai of high rank when buried by the ancient rite. His features were still recognizable after all those years of sepulture; and he seemed to nod a grim assent to what had been done as his sword was given back to him. At last the mother of Ai became too weak and ill to work at the loom, and the gold of the dead had been spent. Ai said: "Mother, I know there is but one thing now to do. Let me be sold to the dancing girls." The mother wept, but made no reply. Ai did not weep, but went out alone. She remembered that in other days, when banquets were given in her father's house, and dancers served the wine, a free geisha named Kimika had often caressed her. She went straight to the house of Kimika. "I want you to buy me," said Ai, "and I want a great deal of money." Kimika laughed and petted her, and made her eat and heard her story, which was bravely told without one tear. "My child," said Kimika, "I cannot give you a great deal of money, for I have very little. But this I can do: I can promise to support your mother. That will be better than to give her much money for you, because your mother, my child, has been a great lady, and therefore cannot know how to use money cunningly. Ask your honored mother to sign the bond, promising that you will stay with me till you are 24 years old, or until such time as you can pay me back. And what money I can now spare, take home with you as a free gift." Thus Ai became a geisha, and Kimika renamed her Kimiko, and kept the pledge to maintain the mother and the child's sister. The mother died before Kimiko became famous; the little sister was put to school. Afterwards those things already told came to pass. The young man who had wanted to die for love of a dancing girl was worthy of better things. He was an only son, and his parents, wealthy and titled people, were willing to make any sacrifice for him, even that of accepting a geisha for daughter in law. Moreover, they were not altogether displeased with Kimiko, because of her sympathy for their boy. Before going away, Kimiko attended the wedding of her young sister Ume, who had just finished school. She was good and pretty. Kimiko had made the match, and used her wicked knowledge of men in making it. She chose a very plain, honest, old fashioned merchant, a man who could not have been bad even if he tried. Ume did not question the wisdom of her sister's choice, which time proved fortunate. IV. It was in the period of the fourth moon that Kimiko was carried away to the home prepared for her, a place in which to forget all the unpleasant realities of life, a sort of fairy palace, lost in the charmed repose of great shadowy, silent, high walled gardens. Therein she might have felt as one reborn, by reason of good deeds, into the realm of Horai. But the spring passed, and the summer came, and Kimiko remained simply Kimiko. 3 times she had contrived, for reasons unspoken, to put off the wedding day. In the period of the eighth moon Kimiko ceased to be playful, and told her reasons very gently but very firmly. "It is time that I should say what I have long delayed saying. For the sake of the mother who gave me life, and for the sake of my little sister, I have lived in hell. All that is past; but the scorch of the fire is upon me, and there is no power that can take it away. It is not for such as I to enter into an honored family, nor to bear you a son, nor to build up your house. Suffer me to speak; for in the knowing of wrong I am very, very much wiser than you. Never shall I be your wife to become your shame. I am your companion only, your playfellow, your guest of an hour. And this not for any gifts. When I shall be no longer with you, nay, certainly that day must come, you will have clearer sight. I shall still be dear to you, but not in the same way as now, which is foolishness. You will remember these words out of my heart. Some true sweet lady will be chosen for you, to become the mother of your children. I shall see them, but the place of a wife I shall never take, and the joy of a mother I must never know. I am only your folly, my beloved, an illusion, a dream, a shadow flitting across your life. Somewhat more in later time I may become, but a wife to you never, neither in this existence nor in the next. Ask me again, and I go." In the period of the 10th moon, and without any reason imaginable, Kimiko disappeared, vanished, utterly ceased to exist. V. Nobody knew when or how or whither she had gone. Even in the neighborhood of the home she had left, none had seen her pass. At first it seemed that she must soon return. Of all her beautiful and precious things, her robes, her ornaments, her presents, a fortune in themselves, she had taken nothing. But weeks passed without word or sign; and it was feared that something terrible had befallen her. Rivers were dragged and wells were searched; inquiries were made by telegraph and by letter; trusted servants were sent to look for her; rewards were offered for any news, especially a reward to Kimika, who was really attached to the girl, and would have been only too happy to find her without any reward at all. But the mystery remained a mystery. Application to the authorities would have been useless. The fugitive had done no wrong, broken no law; and the vast machinery of the imperial police system was not to be set in motion by the passionate whim of a boy. Months grew into years; but neither Kimika, nor the little sister in Kyoto, nor any one of the thousands who had known and admired the beautiful dancer, ever saw Kimiko again. But what she had foretold came true. For time dries all tears and quiets all longing; and even in Japan one does not really try to die twice for the same despair. The lover of Kimiko became wiser; and there was found for him a very sweet person for wife, who gave him a son. And other years passed; and there was happiness in the fairy home where Kimiko had once been. There came to that room one morning, as if seeking alms, a traveling nun. And the child, hearing her Buddhist cry of "Hai! Hai!" ran to the gate; and presently a house servant, bringing out the customary gift of rice, wondered to see the nun caressing the child and whispering to him. Then the little one cried to the servant, "Let me give!" And the nun pleaded from under the veiling shadow of her great straw hat, "Honorably allow the child to give me." So the boy put the rice into the mendicant's bowl. Then she thanked him and said, "Now will you say again for me the little word which I prayed you to tell your honored father?" And the child lisped, "Father, one whom you will never see again in this world, says that her heart is glad because she has seen your son." The nun laughed softly and caressed him again, and passed away swiftly, and the servant wondered more than ever while the child ran to tell his father the words of the mendicant. But the father's eyes dimmed as he heard the words, and he wept over his boy; for he, and only he, knew who had been at the gate, and the sacrificial meaning of all that had been hidden. Now he thinks much, but tells his thought to no one. He knows that the space between son and son is less than the space between himself and the woman who loved him. He knows it were vain to ask in what remote city, in what fantastic riddle of narrow, nameless streets, in what obscure little temple known only to the poorest poor, she waits for the darkness before the dawn of the immeasurable light, when the face of the teacher will smile upon her, when the voice of the teacher will say to her, in tones of sweetness deeper than ever came from human lovers' lips, "O my daughter in the law, thou hast practiced the perfect way; thou hast believed and understood the highest truth; therefore come I now to meet and to welcome thee." End of Chapter 15. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix I of Kokoro, Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life, by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix I. Three Popular Ballads. Read before the Asiatic Society of Japan, October 17, 1894. During the spring of 1891 I visited the settlement in Matsue, Izumo, of an outcast people known as the Yama no Mono. Some results of the visit were subsequently communicated to the Japan Mail in a letter published June 13, 1891, and some extracts from that letter I think it may be worth while to cite here by way of introduction to the subject of the present paper. The settlement is at the southern end of Matsue, in a tiny valley, or rather hollow among the hills, which form a half circle behind the city. Few Japanese of the better classes have ever visited such a village. and even the poorest of the common people shun the place as they would shun a center of contagion, for the idea of defilement, both moral and physical, is still attached to the very name of its inhabitants. Thus, although the settlement is within half an hour's walk from the heart of the city, probably not half a dozen of the 36,000 residents of Matsue have visited it. There are four distinct outcast classes in Matsue and its environs: the Hachiya, the Koya no Mono, the Yama no Mono, and the Eta of Suguta. There are two settlements of Hachiya. These were formerly the public executioners, and served under the police in various capacities. Although by ancient law the lowest class of pariahs, their intelligence was sufficiently cultivated by police service and by contact with superiors to elevate them in popular opinion above the other outcasts. They are now manufacturers of bamboo cages and baskets. They are said to be descendants of the family and retainers of Taira no Masakado Heishino, the only man in Japan who ever seriously conspired to seize the imperial thrones by armed force, and who was killed by the famous general Taira no Sadamori. The Koya no Mono are slaughterers and dealers in hides. They are never allowed to enter any house in Matsue, except the shop of a dealer in geta and other footgear. Originally vagrants, they were permanently settled in Matsue by some famous daimyo, who built for them small houses (koya) on the bank of the canal, hence their name. As for the Eta proper, their condition and calling are too familiar to need comment in this connection. The Yama no Mono are so called because they live among the hills (yama) at the southern end of Matsue. They have a monopoly of the rag and waste paper business, and are buyers of all sorts of refuse, from old bottles to broken down machinery. Some of them are rich. Indeed, the whole class is, compared with other outcast classes, prosperous. Nevertheless, public prejudice against them is still almost as strong as in the years previous to the abrogation of the special laws concerning them. Under no conceivable circumstances could any of them obtain employment as servants. Their prettiest girls in old times often became joro; but at no time could they enter a joroya in any neighboring city, much less in their own, so they were sold to establishments in remote places. A Yama no Mono today could not even become a kurumaya. He could not obtain employment as a common laborer in any capacity, except by going to some distant city where he could hope to conceal his origin. But if detected under such conditions, he would run serious risk of being killed by his fellow laborers. Under any circumstance it would be difficult for a Yama no Mono to pass himself off for a heimin. Centuries of isolation and prejudice have fixed and molded the manners of the class in recognizable ways, and even its language has become a special and curious dialect. I was anxious to see something of a class so singularly situated and specialized; and I had the good fortune to meet a Japanese gentleman who, although belonging to the highest class of Matsue, was kind enough to agree to accompany me to their village, where he had never been himself. On the way thither he told me many curious things about the Yama no Mono. In feudal times these people had been kindly treated by the samurai; and they were often allowed or invited to enter the courts of samurai dwellings to sing and dance, for which performances they were paid. The songs and the dances with which they were able to entertain even those aristocratic families were known to no other people, and were called Daikokumai. Singing the Daikokumai was in fact a special hereditary art of the Yama no Mono, and represented their highest comprehension of aesthetic and emotional matters. In former times they could not obtain admittance to a respectable theatre, and, like the Hachiya, had theatres of their own. It would be interesting, my friend added, to learn the origin of their songs and their dances; for their songs are not in their own special dialect, but in pure Japanese. And that they should have been able to preserve this oral literature without deterioration is especially remarkable from the fact that the Yama no Mono were never taught to read or write. They could not even avail themselves of those new educational opportunities which the era of Meiji has given to the masses. Prejudice is still far too strong to allow of their children being happy in a public school. A small special school might be possible, though there would perhaps be no small difficulty in obtaining willing teachers. Footnote 1: Since the time this letter to the mail was written, a primary school has been established for the yama no mono, through the benevolence of Matsue citizens superior to prejudice. The undertaking did not escape severe local criticism, but it seems to have proved successful. Footnote 1: The hollow in which the village stands is immediately behind the Buddhist cemetery of Tokoji. The settlement has its own Shinto temple. I was extremely surprised at the aspect of the place, for I had expected to see a good deal of ugliness and filth. On the contrary, I saw a multitude of neat dwellings, with pretty gardens about them, and pictures on the walls of the rooms. There were many trees; the village was green with shrubs and plants, and picturesque to an extreme degree; for, owing to the irregularity of the ground, the tiny streets climbed up and down hill at all sorts of angles, the loftiest street being 50 or 60 feet above the lowermost. A large public bath house and a public laundry bore evidence that the yama no mono liked clean linen as well as their heimin neighbors on the other side of the hill. A crowd soon gathered to look at the strangers who had come to their village, a rare event for them. The faces I saw seemed much like the faces of the heimin, except that I fancied the ugly ones were uglier, making the pretty ones appear more pretty by contrast. There were one or two sinister faces, recalling faces of gypsies that I had seen; while some little girls, on the other hand, had remarkably pleasing features. There were no exchanges of civilities as upon meeting heimin. A Japanese of the better class would as soon think of taking off his hat to a yama no mono as a West Indian planter would think of bowing to a negro. The yama no mono themselves usually show by their attitude that they expect no forms. None of the men saluted us; but some of the women, on being kindly addressed, made obeisance. Other women, weaving coarse straw sandals, an inferior quality of zori, would answer only yes or no to questions, and seemed to be suspicious of us. My friend called my attention to the fact that the women were dressed differently from Japanese women of the ordinary classes. For example, even among the very poorest heimin, there are certain accepted laws of costume. There are certain colors which may or may not be worn according to age. But even elderly women among these people wear obi of bright red or variegated hues, and kimono of a showy tint. Those of the women seen in the city streets, selling or buying, are the elders only. The younger stay at home. The elderly women always go into town with large baskets of a peculiar shape, by which the fact that they are yama no mono is at once known. Numbers of these baskets were visible, principally at the doors of the smaller dwellings. They are carried on the back, and are used to contain all that the yama no mono buy, old paper, old wearing apparel, bottles, broken glass, and scrap metal. A woman at last ventured to invite us to her house, to look at some old colored prints she wished to sell. Thither we went, and were as nicely received as in a heimin residence. The pictures, including a number of drawings by Hiroshige, proved to be worth buying; and my friend then asked if we could have the pleasure of hearing the Daikoku mai. To my great satisfaction the proposal was well received; and on our agreeing to pay a trifle to each singer, a small band of neat looking young girls, whom we had not seen before, made their appearance and prepared to sing, while an old woman made ready to dance. Both the old woman and the girls provided themselves with curious instruments for the performance. 3 girls had instruments shaped like mallets, made of paper and bamboo. These were intended to represent the hammer of Daikoku. They were held in the left hand, a fan being waved in the right. Footnote 2: Daikoku is the popular god of wealth. Ebisu is the patron of labor. Footnote 2. Other girls were provided with a kind of castanets, 2 flat pieces of hard, dark wood, connected by a string. 6 girls formed in a line before the house. The old woman took her place facing the girls, holding in her hands 2 little sticks, one stick being notched along a part of its length. By drawing it across the other stick, a curious rattling noise was made. My friend pointed out to me that the singers formed 2 distinct parties of 3 each. Those bearing the hammer and fan were the Daikoku band. They were to sing the ballads. Those with the castanets were the Ebisu party, and formed the chorus. The old woman rubbed her little sticks together; and from the throats of the Daikoku band there rang out a clear, sweet burst of song, quite different from anything I had heard before in Japan, while the tapping of the castanets kept exact time to the syllabification of the words, which were very rapidly uttered. When the first three girls had sung a certain number of lines, the voices of the other three joined in, producing a very pleasant though untrained harmony; and all sang the burden together. Then the Daikoku party began another verse, and after a certain interval the chorus was again sung. In the meanwhile the old woman was dancing a very fantastic dance, which provoked laughter from the crowd, occasionally chanting a few comic words. The song was not comic, however. It was a very pathetic ballad entitled Yaoya O Shichi. Yaoya O Shichi was a beautiful girl, who set fire to her own house in order to obtain another meeting with her lover, an acolyte in a temple where she expected that her family would be obliged to take refuge after the fire. But being detected and convicted of arson, she was condemned by the severe law of that age to be burnt alive. The sentence was carried into effect; but the youth and beauty of the victim, and the motive of her offense, evoked a sympathy in the popular heart which found later expression in song and drama. None of the performers, except the old woman, lifted the feet from the ground while singing; but all swayed their bodies in time to the melody. The singing lasted more than 1 hour, during which the voices never failed in their quality. And yet, so far from being weary of it, and although I could not understand a word uttered, I felt very sorry when it was all over. And with the pleasure received there came to the foreign listener also a strong sense of sympathy for the young singers, victims of a prejudice so ancient that its origin is no longer known. The foregoing extracts from my letter to the mail tell the history of my interest in the Daikoku mai. At a later time I was able to procure, through the kindness of my friend Nishida Sentaro of Matsue, written copies of 3 of the ballads as sung by the yama no mono; and translations of these were afterwards made for me. I now venture to offer my prose renderings of the ballads, based on the translations referred to, as examples of folk song not devoid of interest. An absolutely literal rendering, executed with the utmost care, and amply supplied with explanatory notes, would be, of course, more worthy the attention of a learned society. Such a version would, however, require a knowledge of Japanese which I do not possess, as well as much time and patient labor. Were the texts in themselves of value sufficient to justify a scholarly translation, I should not have attempted any translation at all. But I felt convinced that their interest was of a sort which could not be much diminished by a free and easy treatment. From any purely literary point of view, the texts are disappointing, exhibiting no great power of imagination, and nothing really worthy to be called poetical art. While reading such verses, we find ourselves very far away indeed from the veritable poetry of Japan, from those compositions which, with a few chosen syllables only, can either create a perfect colored picture in the mind, or bestir the finest sensations of memory with marvelous penetrative delicacy. The Daikoku mai are extremely crude; and their long popularity has been due, I fancy, rather to the very interesting manner of singing them than to any quality which could permit us to compare them with the old English ballads. The legends upon which these chants were based still exist in many other forms, including dramatic compositions. I need scarcely refer to the vast number of artistic suggestions which they have given; but I may observe that their influence in this regard has not yet passed away. Only a few months ago I saw a number of pretty cotton prints, fresh from the mill, picturing Oguri Hangwan making the horse Onikage stand upon a chessboard. Whether the versions of the ballads I obtained in Izumo were composed there or elsewhere, I am quite unable to say; but the stories of Shuntoku maru, Oguri Hangwan, and Yaoya O Shichi are certainly well known in every part of Japan. Together with these prose translations, I submit to the Society the original texts, to which are appended some notes of interest about the local customs connected with the singing of the Daikoku mai, about the symbols used by the dancers, and about the comic phrases chanted at intervals during the performances, phrases of which the coarse humor sometimes forbids any rendering. All the ballads are written in the same measure, exemplified by the first 4 lines of Yaoya O Shichi: Koe ni yoru nen no aki no tsukika, tsuma yori mi oba kogasunari gonin musume no sanode iro mo kawasanu edo zakura. The chorus, or hayashi, does not seem to be sung at the end of a fixed number of lines, but rather at the termination of certain parts of the recitative. There is also no fixed limit to the number of singers in either band. These may be very many or very few. I think that the curious Izumo way of singing the burden, so that the vowel sounds in the word iya uttered by one band, and in the word sore uttered by the other, are made to blend together, might be worth the attention of someone interested in Japanese folk music. Indeed, I am convinced that a very delightful and wholly unexplored field of study offers itself in Japan to the student of folk music and popular chants. The songs of the Honen Odori, or harvest dances, with their curious choruses; the chants of the Bon Odori, which differ in every district; the strange snatches of song, often sweet and weird, that one hears from the rice fields or the mountain slopes in remote provinces, have qualities totally different from those we are accustomed to associate with the idea of Japanese music, a charm indisputable even for Western ears, because not less in harmony with the nature inspiring it than the song of a bird or the shrilling of cicada. To reproduce such melodies, with their extraordinary fractional tones, would be no easy task, but I cannot help believing that the result would fully repay the labor. Not only do they represent a very ancient, perhaps primitive musical sense; they represent also something essentially characteristic of the race; and there is surely much to be learned in regard to race emotion from the comparative study of folk music. The fact, however, that few of those peculiarities which give so strange a charm to the old peasant chants are noticeable in the Izumo manner of singing the Daikoku mai would perhaps indicate that the latter are comparatively modern. End of Appendix 1. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix 2 of Kokoro. Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix 2. The Ballad of Shuntoku Maru. Ara! Joyfully young Daikoku and Ebiso enter dancing. Shall we tell a tale, or shall we utter felicitations? A tale. Then of what is it best that we should tell? Since we are bidden to your august house to relate a story, we shall relate the story of Shuntoku. Surely there once lived, in the province of Kawachi, a very rich man called Nobuyoshi; and his eldest son was called Shuntoku Maru. When Shuntoku Maru, that eldest son, was only 3 years old, his mother died; and when he was 5 years old, there was given to him a stepmother. When he was 7 years old, his stepmother gave birth to a son, who was called Otokowaka Maru; and the two brothers grew up together. When Shuntoku became 16 years old, he went to Kyoto, to the temple of Tenjin Sama, to make offerings to the god. There he saw 1,000 people going to the temple, and 1,000 returning, and 1,000 remaining. There was a gathering of 3,000 persons. Through that multitude the youngest daughter of a rich man called Hagiyama was being carried to the temple in a kago. Shuntoku also was traveling in a kago; and the two kago moved side by side along the way. Gazing on the girl, Shuntoku fell in love with her; and the two exchanged looks and letters of love. All this was told to the stepmother of Shuntoku by a servant that was a flatterer. Then the stepmother began to think that, should the youth remain in his father's home, the storehouses east and west, and the granaries north and south, and the house that stood in the midst, could never belong to Otokawaka Maru. Therefore she devised an evil thing, and spoke to her husband, saying: "Sir, my lord, may I have your honored permission to be free for 7 days from the duties of the household?" Her husband answered: "Yes, surely. But what is it that you wish to do for 7 days?" She said to him: "Before being wedded to my lord, I made a vow to the august deity of Kiyomidzu; and now I desire to go to the temple to fulfill that vow." Said the master: "That is well. But which of the manservants or maidservants would you wish to go with you?" Then she made reply: Neither manservant nor maidservant do I require. I wish to go all alone." And without paying heed to any advice about her journey, she departed from the house, and made great haste to Kyoto. Reaching the quarter Sanjo in the city of Kyoto, she asked the way to the street Kajiyamachi, which is the street of the smiths. And finding it, she saw three smithies side by side. Going to the middle one, she greeted the smith, and asked him: "Sir Smith, can you make some fine small work in iron?" And he answered: "Aye, lady, that I can." Then she said: "Make me, I pray you, 49 nails without heads." But he answered: "I am of the seventh generation of a family of smiths; yet never did I hear till now of nails without heads, and such an order I cannot take. It were better that you should ask elsewhere." "Nay," said she, "since I came first to you, I do not want to go elsewhere. Make them for me, I pray, Sir Smith." He answered: "Of a truth, if I make such nails, I must be paid 1,000 ryo." She replied to him: "If you make them all for me, I care nothing whether you desire 1,000 or 2,000 ryo. Make them, I pray you, Sir Smith." So the smith could not well refuse to make the nails. He arranged all things rightly to honor the god of the bellows. Then taking up his first hammer, he recited the Kongo Sutra. Taking up his second, he recited the Kwannon Sutra. Taking up the third, he recited the Amida Sutra, because he feared those nails might be used for a wicked purpose. Thus in sorrow he finished the nails. Then was the woman much pleased. And receiving the nails in her left hand, she paid the money to the smith with her right, and bade him farewell, and went upon her way. When she was gone, then the smith thought: "Surely I have in gold koban the sum of 1,000 ryo. But this life of ours is only like the resting place of a traveler journeying; and I must show to others some pity and kindness. To those who are cold I will give clothing, and to those who are hungry I will give food." And by announcing his intention in writings, set up at the boundaries of provinces and at the limits of villages, he was able to show his benevolence to many people. On her way the woman stopped at the house of a painter, and asked the painter to paint for her a picture. And the painter questioned her, saying: "Shall I paint you the picture of a very old plum tree, or of an ancient pine?" She said to him: "No, I want neither the picture of an old plum tree nor of an ancient pine. I want the picture of a boy of 16 years, having a stature of 5 feet, and 2 moles upon his face." "That," said the painter, "will be an easy thing to paint." And he made the picture in a very little time. It was much like Shuntoku maru; and the woman rejoiced as she departed. With that picture of Shuntoku she hastened to Kiyomidzu; and she pasted the picture upon one of the pillars in the rear of the temple. And with 47 out of the 49 nails she nailed the picture to the pillar; and with the 2 remaining nails she nailed the eyes. Then, feeling assured that she had put a curse upon Shuntoku, that wicked woman went home. And she said humbly: "I have returned." And she pretended to be faithful and true. Now 3 or 4 months after the stepmother of Shuntoku had thus invoked evil upon him, he became very sick. Then that stepmother secretly rejoiced. And she spoke cunningly to Nobuyoshi, her husband, saying: "Sir, my lord, this sickness of Shuntoku seems to be a very bad sickness; and it is difficult to keep one having such sickness in the house of a rich man." Then Nobuyoshi was much surprised, and sorrowed greatly. But thinking to himself that indeed it could not be helped, he called Shuntoku to him, and said: "Son, this sickness which you have seems to be leprosy; and one having such a sickness cannot continue to dwell in this house. It were best for you, therefore, to make a pilgrimage through all the provinces, in the hope that you may be healed by divine influence. And my storehouses and my granaries I will not give to Otowaka maru, but only to you, Shuntoku; so you must come back to us." Poor Shuntoku, not knowing how wicked his stepmother was, besought her in his sad condition, saying: "Dear mother, I have been told that I must go forth and wander as a pilgrim. But now I am blind, and I cannot travel without difficulty. I should be content with 1 meal a day in place of 3, and glad for permission to live in a corner of some store room or outhouse; but I should like to remain somewhere near my house. Will you not please permit me to stay, if only for a little time? Honored mother, I beseech you, let me stay." But she answered: As this trouble which you now have is only the beginning of the bad disease, it is not possible for me to suffer you to stay. You must go away from the house at once." Then Shuntoku was forced out of the house by the servants, and into the yard, sorrowing greatly. And the wicked stepmother, following, cried out: "As your father has commanded, you must go away at once, Shuntoku." Shuntoku answered: "See, I have not even a traveling dress. A pilgrim's gown and leggings I ought to have, and a pilgrim's wallet for begging." At hearing these words the wicked stepmother was glad, and she at once gave him all that he required. Shuntoku received the things and thanked her, and made ready to depart even in his piteous state. He put on the gown, and hung a wooden mamori upon his breast, and he suspended the wallet about his neck. He put on his straw sandals and fastened them tightly, and took a bamboo staff in his hand, and placed a hat of woven rushes upon his head. And saying, "Farewell, father; farewell, mother," poor Shuntoku started on his journey. Sorrowfully Nobuyoshi accompanied his son a part of the way, saying, "It cannot be helped, Shuntoku. But if, through the divine favor of those august deities to whom that charm is dedicated, your disease should become cured, then come back to us at once, my son." Hearing from his father these kind words of farewell, Shuntoku felt much happier, and covering his face with the great rush hat, so as not to be known to the neighbors, he went on alone. But in a little while, finding his limbs so weak that he was afraid he could not go far, and feeling his heart always drawn back toward his home, so that he could not help often stopping and turning his face thither, he became sad again. Since it would have been difficult for him to enter any dwelling, he had often to sleep under pine trees or in the forests; but sometimes he was lucky enough to find shelter in some wayside shrine containing images of the Buddhas. And once in the darkness of the morning, before the breaking of the day, in the hour when the crows first begin to fly abroad and cry, the dead mother of Shuntoku came to him in a dream. And she said to him: "Son, your affliction has been caused by the witchcraft of your wicked stepmother. Go now to the divinity of Kiyomidzu, and beseech the goddess that you may be healed." Shuntoku arose, wondering, and took his way toward the city of Kyoto, toward the temple of Kiyomidzu. One day as he traveled, he went to the gate of the house of a rich man named Hagiyama, crying out loudly, "Alms! Alms!" Then a maidservant of the house, hearing the cry, came out and gave him food, and laughed aloud, saying: "Who could help laughing at the idea of trying to give anything to so comical a pilgrim?" Shuntoku asked, "Why do you laugh? I am the son of a rich and well famed man, Nobuyoshi of Kawachi; but because of a malediction invoked upon me by my wicked stepmother, I have become as you see me." Then Otohime, a daughter of that family, hearing the voices, came out and asked the maid, "Why did you laugh?" The servant answered, "Oh, my lady, there was a blind man from Kawachi who seemed about 20 years old, clinging to the pillar of the gate, and loudly crying, 'Alms! Alms!' So I tried to give him some clean rice upon a tray. But when I held out the tray toward his right hand, he advanced his left; and when I held out the tray toward his left hand, he advanced his right. That was the reason I could not help laughing." Hearing the maid explaining this to the young lady, the blind man became angry, and said, "You have no right to despise strangers. I am the son of a rich and well famed man in Kawachi, and I am called Shuntoku Maru." Then the daughter of that house, Otohime, suddenly remembering him, also became quite angry, and said to the servant, "You must not laugh rudely. Laughing at others to day, you might be laughed at yourself to morrow." But Otohime had been so startled that she could not help trembling a little, and retiring to her room, she suddenly fainted away. Then in the house all was confusion, and a doctor was summoned in great haste; but the girl, being quite unable to take any medicine, only became weaker and weaker. Then many famous physicians were sent for, and they consulted together about Otohime; and they decided at last that her sickness had been caused only by some sudden sorrow. So the mother said to her sick daughter: "Tell me, without concealment, if you have any secret grief; and if there be anything you want, whatever it be, I will try to get it for you." Otohime replied: "I am very much ashamed; but I shall tell you what I wish. The blind man who came here the other day was the son of a rich and well famed citizen of Kawachi, called Nobuyoshi. At the time of the festival of Tenjin in Kitano in Kyoto, I met that young man there on my way to the temple, and we then exchanged letters of love, pledging ourselves to each other; and therefore I very much wish that I may be allowed to travel in search of him until I find him wherever he may be." The mother kindly made answer: "That indeed will be well. If you wish for a kago, you may have one; or if you would like to have a horse, you can have one. You can choose any servant you like to accompany you; and I can let you have as many koban as you desire." Otohime answered: "Neither horse nor kago do I need, nor any servant. I need only the dress of a pilgrim, leggings and gown, and a mendicant's wallet." For Otohime held it her duty to set out by herself all alone, just as Shuntoku had done. So she left home, saying farewell to her parents, with eyes full of tears. Scarcely could she find voice to utter the word good by. Over mountains and mountains she passed, and again over mountains, hearing only the cries of wild deer and the sound of torrent water. Sometimes she would lose her way; sometimes she would pursue alone a steep and difficult path; always she journeyed sorrowing. At last she saw before her, far, far away, the pine tree called Kawamamatsu, and the two rocks called Ota. And when she saw those rocks, she thought of Shuntoku with love and hope. Hastening on, she met 5 or 6 persons going to Kumano; and she asked them: "Have you not met on your way a blind youth, about 16 years old?" They made answer: "No, not yet; but should we meet him anywhere, we will tell him whatever you wish." This reply greatly disappointed Otohime; and she began to think that all her efforts to find her lover might be in vain, and she became very sad. At last she became so sad that she resolved not to try to find him in this world any more, but to drown herself at once in the pool of Sawara, that she might be able to meet him in a future state. She hurried there as fast as she could; and when she reached the pond, she fixed her pilgrim's staff in the ground, and hung her outer robe on a pine tree, and threw away her wallet, and, loosening her hair, arranged it in the style called shimada. Then, having filled her sleeves with stones, she was about to leap into the water, when there appeared suddenly before her a venerable man of seemingly not less than 80 years, robed all in white, and bearing a tablet in his hand. And the aged man said to her: "Be not thus in haste to die, Otohime. Shuntoku whom you seek is at Kiyomidzu San. Go thither and meet him." These were indeed the happiest tidings she could have desired; and she became at once very happy. And she knew she had thus been saved by the august favor of her guardian deity, and that it was the god himself who had spoken to her those words. So she cast away the stones she had put into her sleeves, and donned again the outer robe she had taken off, and rearranged her hair, and took her way in all haste to the temple of Kiyomidzu. At last she reached the temple. She ascended the 3 lower steps, and glancing beneath the porch, she saw her lover, Shuntoku, lying there asleep, covered with a straw mat; and she called to him, "Moshi, moshi!" Shuntoku, thus being suddenly awakened, seized his staff, which was lying by his side, and cried out: "Every day the children of this neighborhood come here and annoy me because I am blind." Otohime, hearing these words, and feeling great sorrow, approached and laid her hands on her poor lover, and said to him: "I am not one of those bad mischievous children. I am the daughter of the wealthy Hagiyama; and because I promised myself to you at the festival of Kitano Tenjin in Kyoto, I have come here to see you." Astonished at hearing the voice of his sweetheart, Shuntoku rose up quickly, and cried out: "Oh, are you really Otohime? It is a long time since we last met; but this is so strange. Is it not all a lie?" And then, stroking each other, they could only cry instead of speaking. But presently Shuntoku, giving way to the excitement of his grief, cried out to Otohime: "A malediction has been laid upon me by my stepmother; and my appearance has been changed, as you see. Therefore never can I be united to you as your husband. Even as I now am, so must I remain until I fester to death. And so you must go back home at once, and live in happiness and splendor." But she answered in great sorrow: "Never! Are you really in earnest? Are you truly in your right senses?" "No, no. I have disguised myself thus only because I loved you enough even to give my life for you. And now I will never leave you, no matter what may become of me in the future." Shuntoku was comforted by these words, but he was also filled with pity for her, so that he wept without being able to speak a word. Then she said to him: "Since your wicked stepmother bewitched you only because you were rich, I am not afraid to revenge you by bewitching her also; for I, too, am the child of a rich man." And then with her whole heart she spoke thus to the divinity within the temple: "For the space of 7 days and 7 nights I shall remain fasting in this temple to prove my vow. And if you have any truth and pity, I beseech you to save us. For so great a building as this, a thatched roof is not the proper roof. I will re‐roof it with feathers of little birds; and the ridge of the roof I will cover with thigh feathers of falcons. This torii and these lanterns of stone are ugly. I will erect a torii of gold; and I will make 1,000 lamps of gold, and 1,000 of silver, and every evening I will light them. In so large a garden as this there should be trees. I will plant 1,000 hinoki, 1,000 sugi, 1,000 karamatsu. But if Shuntoku should not be healed by reason of this vow, then he and I will drown ourselves together in yonder lotos pond. And after our death, taking the form of 2 great serpents, we will torment all who come to worship at this temple, and bar the way against pilgrims." Now, strange to say, on the night of the 7th day after she had vowed this vow, there came to her in a dream Kwannon Sama, who said to her: "The prayer which you prayed I shall grant." Forthwith Otohime awoke, and told her dream to Shuntoku; and they both wondered. They arose and went down to the river together, and washed themselves, and worshipped the goddess. Then, strange to say, the eyes of blind Shuntoku were fully opened, and his clear sight came back to him, and the disease passed away from him. And both wept because of the greatness of their joy. Together they sought an inn, and there laid aside their pilgrim dresses, and put on fresh robes, and hired kago and carriers to bear them home. Reaching the house of his father, Shuntoku cried out: "Honored parents, I have returned to you. By virtue of the written charm upon the sacred tablet, I have been healed of my sickness, as you may see. Is all well with you, my honored parents?" And Shuntoku's father, hearing, ran out and cried: "Oh, how much troubled I have been for your sake! Never for one moment could I cease to think of you. But now, how glad I am to see you, and the bride you have brought with you!" And all rejoiced together. But, on the other hand, it was very strange that the wicked stepmother at the same moment became suddenly blind, and that her fingers and her toes began to rot, so that she was in great torment. Then the bride and the bridegroom said to that wicked stepmother: "Lo, the leprosy has come upon you. We cannot keep a leper in the house of a rich man. Please to go away at once. We shall give you a pilgrim's gown and leggings, a rush hat and a staff, for we have all these things ready here." Then the wicked stepmother knew that even to save her from death it could not be helped, because she herself had done so wicked a thing before. Shuntoku and his wife were very glad. How rejoiced they were! The stepmother prayed them to allow her only one small meal a day, just as Shuntoku had done. But Otohime said to the stricken woman: "We cannot keep you here, not even in the corner of an outhouse. Go away at once." Also Nobuyoshi said to his wicked wife: "What do you mean by remaining here? How long do you require to go?" And he drove her out, and she could not help herself; and she went away crying, and striving to hide her face from the sight of the neighbors. Otowaka led his blind mother by the hand; and together they went to Kyoto, and to the temple of Kiyomidzu. When they got there, they ascended 3 of the temple steps, and knelt down and prayed the goddess, saying: "Give us power to cast another malediction." But the goddess suddenly appeared before them, and said: "Were it a good thing that you pray for, I would grant your prayer. But with an evil matter I will have no more to do. If you must die, then die there; and after your death you shall be sent to hell, and there put into the bottom of an iron cauldron to be boiled." This is the end of the story of Shuntoku. With a jubilant tap of the fan we finish so, joyfully, joyfully, joyfully. End of Appendix 2. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix 3, Part I. of Kokoro. Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. APPENDIX III. THE BALLAD OF OGURI HANGWAN. Part I. To tell every word of the tale, this is the story of Oguri Hangwan. I. THE BIRTH. The famed Takakura Dainagon, whose other name was Kane Iye, was so rich that he had treasure houses in every direction. He owned one precious stone that had power over fire, and another that had power over water. He also had the claws of a tiger, extracted from the paws of the living animal. He had the horns of a colt; and he likewise owned even a musk cat, Jako Neko. Footnote 1: Muskrat is the translation given by some dictionaries. Musk deer was suggested by my translator. But as some mythological animal is evidently meant, I thought it better to translate the word literally. Footnote 1: Of all that a man might have in this world, he wanted nothing except an heir, and he had no other cause for sorrow. A trusted servant in his house, named Ikenoshoji, said at last to him these words: "Seeing that the Buddhist deity Tamon Ten, enshrined upon the holy mountain of Kurama, is famed for his divine favor far and near, I respectfully entreat you to go to that temple and make prayer to him, for then your wish will surely be fulfilled." To this the master agreed, and at once began to make preparation for a journey to the temple. As he traveled with great speed, he reached the temple very soon; and there, having purified his body by pouring water over it, he prayed with all his heart for an heir. And during 3 days and 3 nights he abstained from food of every sort; but all seemed in vain. Wherefore the lord, despairing because of the silence of the god, resolved to perform harakiri in the temple, and so to defile the sacred building. Moreover, he resolved that his spirit, after his death, should haunt the mountain of Kurama, to deter and terrify all pilgrims upon the 9-mile path of the mountain. The delay of even one moment would have been fatal; but good Ikenoshoji came running to the place just in time, and prevented the seppuku. "Oh, my lord," the retainer cried, "you are surely too hasty in your resolve to die. Rather first suffer me to try my fortune, and see if I may not be able to offer up prayer for your sake with more success." Then, after having 21 times purified his body, 7 times washing with hot water, 7 times with cold, and yet another 7 times washing himself with a bundle of bamboo grass, he thus prayed to the god: "If to my lord an heir be given by the divine favor, then I vow that I will make offering of paving blocks of bronze, wherewith to pave this temple court; also of lanterns of bronze to stand in rows without the temple, and of plating of pure gold and pure silver to cover all the pillars within." And upon the third of the 3 nights which he passed in prayer before the god, Tamon Ten revealed himself to the pious Ikenoshoji, and said to him: "Earnestly wishing to grant your petition, I sought far and near for a fitting heir, even as far as Tenjiku (India) and Kara (China). But though human beings are numerous as the stars in the sky or the countless pebbles upon the shore, I was grieved that I could not find of the seed of man one heir that might well be given to your master. And at last, not knowing what else to do, I took away by stealth the spirit of one of the 8 children whose father was one of the Shitenno, residing on the peak Ari Ari, far among the Dandoku mountains; and that child I will give to become the heir of your master." Footnote 3: Shitenno, the 4 Deva kings of Buddhism, who guard the 4 quarters of the world. Having thus spoken, the deity retired within the innermost shrine. Then Ikenoshoji, starting from his real dream, 9 times prostrated himself before the god, and hastened to the dwelling of his master. Ere long the wife of Takakura Dainagon found herself with child; and after the 10 happy months she bore a son with painless labor. It was strange that the infant had upon his forehead, marked quite plainly and naturally, the Chinese character for rice. And it was yet more strange to find that in his eyes 4 Buddhas were reflected. Footnote 5: Shitai no mi hotoke, literally a 4-bodied august Buddha. The image in the eye is called the Buddha. The idea here expressed seems to be that the eyes of the child reflected 4 instead of 2 images. Children of supernatural beings were popularly said to have double pupils. but I am giving only a popular explanation of the term. Ikenoshoji and the parents rejoiced; and the name Ariwaka, "young Ari," was given the child after the name of the mountain Ari Ari, on the third day after the birth. II. THE BANISHMENT. Very quickly the child grew; and when he became 15, the reigning emperor gave him the name and title of Oguri Hangwan Kane uji. When he reached manhood, his father resolved to get him a bride. So the Dainagon looked upon all the daughters of the ministers and high officials, but he found none that he thought worthy to become the wife of his son. But the young Hangwan, learning that he himself had been a gift to his parents from Tamon Ten, resolved to pray to that deity for a spouse; and he hastened to the temple of the divinity, accompanied by Ikenoshoji. There they washed their hands and rinsed their mouths, and remained 3 nights without sleep, passing all the time in religious exercises. But as they had no companions, the young prince at last felt very lonesome, and began to play on his flute, made of the root of the bamboo. Seemingly charmed by these sweet sounds, the great serpent that lived in the temple pond came to the entrance of the temple, transforming its fearful shape into the likeness of a lovely female attendant of the imperial court, and fondly listened to the melody. Then Kane uji thought he saw before him the very lady he desired for a wife; and thinking also that she was the one chosen for him by the deity, he placed the beautiful being in a palanquin, and returned to his home. But no sooner had this happened than a fearful storm burst upon the capital, followed by a great flood; and the flood and the storm both lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. The Emperor was troubled greatly by these omens, and he sent for the astrologers that they might explain the causes thereof. They said in answer to the questions asked of them, that the terrible weather was caused only by the anger of the male serpent, seeking vengeance for the loss of its mate, which was none other than the fair woman that Kane uji had brought back with him. Whereupon the Emperor commanded that Kane uji should be banished to the province of Hitachi, and that the transformed female servant should at once be taken back to the pond upon the mountain of Kurama. And being thus compelled by imperial order to depart, Kane uji went away to the province of Hitachi, followed only by his faithful retainer, Ikenoshoji. III. THE EXCHANGE OF LETTERS. Only a little while after the banishment of Kane uji, a traveling merchant, seeking to sell his wares, visited the house of the exiled prince at Hitachi. And being asked by the Hangwan where he lived, the merchant made answer, saying: "I live in Kyoto, in the street called Muromachi, and my name is Goto Sayemon. My stock consists of goods of 1008 different kinds which I send to China, of 1008 kinds which I send to India, and yet another 1008 kinds which I sell only in Japan; so that my whole stock consists of 3024 different kinds of goods. Concerning the countries to which I have already been, I may answer that I made 3 voyages to India, and 3 to China, and this is my 7th journey to this part of Japan." Having heard these things, Oguri Hangwan asked the merchant whether he knew of any young girl who would make a worthy wife, since he, the prince, being still unmarried, desired to find such a girl. Then said Sayemon: "In the province of Sagami, to the west of us, there lives a rich man called Tokoyama Choja, who has 8 sons. Long he lamented that he had no daughter, and he long prayed for a daughter to the august sun. And a daughter was given him; and after her birth her parents thought it behooved them to give her a higher rank than their own, because her birth had come to pass through the divine influence of the august heaven‐shining deity; so they built for her a separate dwelling. She is, in very truth, superior to all other Japanese women, nor can I think of any other person in every manner worthy of you." This story much pleased Kane uji, and he at once asked Sayemon to act the part of matchmaker for him. *1. Nakodo. The profession of nakodo exists, but any person who arranges marriages for a consideration is for the time being called the nakodo. And Sayemon promised to do everything in his power to fulfill the wish of the Hangwan. Then Kane uji called for inkstone and writing brush, and wrote a love letter, and tied it up with such a knot as love letters are tied with. And he gave it to the merchant to be delivered to the lady; and he gave him also, in reward for his services, 100 golden ryo. Sayemon again and again prostrated himself in thanks, and he put the letter into the box which he always carried with him. And then he lifted the box upon his back, and bade the prince farewell. Now, although the journey from Hitachi to Sagami is commonly a journey of 7 days, the merchant arrived there at noon upon the third day, having traveled in all haste night and day together without stopping. And he went to the building called Inui no Gosho, which had been built by the rich Yokoyama for the sake of his only daughter, Terute Hime, in the district of Soba, in the province of Sagami, and he asked permission to enter therein. But the stern gatekeepers bade him go away, announcing that the dwelling was the dwelling of Terute Hime, daughter of the famed Choja Yokoyama, and that no person of the male sex whosoever could be permitted to enter, and furthermore that guards had been appointed to guard the palace 10 by night and 10 by day, with extreme caution and severity. But the merchant told the gatekeepers that he was Goto Sayemon, of the street called Muromachi, in the city of Kyoto, and that he was a well-famed merchant there, and was by the people called Sendanya; that he had thrice been to India and thrice to China, and was now upon his 7th return journey to the great country of the rising sun. And he said also to them, "Into all the palaces of Nihon, save this one only, I have been freely admitted. So I shall be deeply grateful to you if you permit me to enter." Thus saying, he produced many rolls of silk, and presented them to the gatekeepers, and their cupidity made them blind, and the merchant, without more difficulty, entered, rejoicing. Through the great outer gate he passed, and over a bridge, and then found himself in front of the chambers of the female attendants of the superior class. And he called out with a very loud voice, "O my ladies, all things that you may require I have here with me. I have all jorogata no meshi dogu. I have hair combs and needles and tweezers. I have tategami and combs of silver, and kamoji from Nagasaki, and even all kinds of Chinese mirrors." Whereupon the ladies, delighted with the idea of seeing these things, suffered the merchant to enter their apartment, which he presently made to look like a shop for the sale of female toilet articles. But while making bargains and selling very quickly, Sayemon did not lose the good chance offered him; and taking from his box the love letter which had been confided to him, he said to the ladies, "This letter, if I remember rightly, I picked up in some town in Hitachi; and I shall be very glad if you will accept it, either to use it for a model if it be written beautifully, or to laugh at if it prove to have been written awkwardly." Then the chief among the maids, receiving the letter, tried to read the writing upon the envelope: "Tsuki ni hoshi, ame ni arare ga kori kana," which signified moon and stars, rain and hail, make ice; but she could not read the riddle of the mysterious words. The other ladies, who were also unable to guess the meaning of the words, could not but laugh; and they laughed so shrilly that the Princess Terute heard, and came among them fully robed, and wearing a veil over her night black hair. And the bamboo screen having been rolled up before her, Terute Hime asked, "What is the cause of all this laughing? If there be anything amusing, I wish that you will let me share in the amusement." The maids then answered, saying, "We were laughing only at our being unable to read a letter which this merchant from the capital says that he picked up in some street. And here is the letter; even the address upon it is a riddle to us." And the letter, having been laid upon an open crimson fan, was properly presented to the princess, who received it, and admired the beauty of the writing, and said, "Never have I seen so beautiful a hand as this. It is like the writing of Kobodaishi himself, or of Monju Bosatsu. Perhaps the writer is one of those princes of the Ichijo, or Nijo, or Sanjo families, all famed for their skill in writing. Or, if this guess of mine be wrong, then I should say that these characters have certainly been written by Oguri Hangwan Kane Uji, now so famed in the province of Hitachi. I shall read the letter for you." Then the envelope was removed; and the first phrase she read was, "Fuji no Yama," the mountain of Fuji, which she interpreted as signifying loftiness of rank. And then she met with such phrases as these: "Kiyomidzu Kosaka," the name of a place; "Arare ni Ozasa," hail on the leaves of the bamboo grass; "Itaya ni arare," hail following upon a wooden roof; "Tamato ni kori," ice in the sleeve; "No naka ni shimidzu," pure water running through a moor; "Koike ni makomo," Rushes in a little pond. Inoba ni tsuyu, dew on the leaves of the taro. Shakunaga obi, a very long girdle. Shika ni momiji, deer and maple trees. Futamatagawa, a forked river. Hoso Tanigawa ni Marukibachi, a round log laid over a little stream for a bridge. Tsurunashi Yumi ni Hanuki Dori, a stringless bow and a wingless bird. And then she understood that the characters signified Maireba ao, they would meet, for he would call upon her; Arare nai, then they would not be separated; Korobi ao, they would repose together. And the meaning of the rest was thus: "This letter should be opened within the sleeve, so that others may know nothing of it. Keep the secret in your own bosom. You must yield to me even as the rush bends to the wind. I am earnest to serve you in all things. We shall surely be united at last, whatever chance may separate us at the beginning. I wish for you even as the stag for its mate in the autumn. Even though long kept apart, we shall meet, as meet the waters of a river divided in its upper course into two branches. Divine, I pray you, the meaning of this letter, and preserve it. I hope for a fortunate answer. Thinking of Terute Hime, I feel as though I could fly." And the Princess Terute found at the end of the letter the name of him who wrote it, Oguri Hangwan Kane uji himself, together with her own name as being written to her. Then she felt greatly troubled, because she had not at first supposed that the letter was addressed to her, and had, without thinking, read it aloud to the female attendants. For she well knew that her father would quickly kill her in a most cruel manner, should the iron‐hearted Choja come to know the truth. Footnote 1: Choja is not a proper name. It signifies really a wealthy man only, like the French names un richard, un riche; but is used almost like a proper name in the country still, the richest man in the place, usually a person of influence, being often referred to as the Choja. Wherefore, through fear of being mingled with the earth of the Moor Uwano Gahara, fitting place for a father in wrath to slay his daughter, she set the end of the letter between her teeth, and rent it to pieces, and withdrew to the inner apartment. But the merchant, knowing that he could not go back to Hitachi without bearing some reply, resolved to obtain one by cunning. Wherefore he hurried after the princess even into her innermost apartment, without so much as waiting to remove his sandals, and he cried out loudly: "Oh, my princess! I have been taught that written characters were invented in India by Monju Bosatsu, and in Japan by Kobodaishi. And is it not like tearing the hands of Kobodaishi, thus to tear a letter written with characters? Know you not that a woman is less pure than a man? Wherefore then do you, born a woman, thus presume to tear a letter? Now if you refuse to write a reply, I shall call upon all the gods. I shall announce to them this unwomanly act, and I shall invoke their malediction upon you." And with these words he took from the box which he always carried with him a Buddhist rosary, and he began to twist it about with an awful appearance of anger. Then the Princess Terute, terrified and grieved, prayed him to cease his invocations, and promised that she would write an answer at once. So her answer was quickly written and given to the merchant, who was overjoyed by his success, and speedily departed for Hitachi, carrying his box upon his back. IV. How Kane uji became a bridegroom without his father‐in‐law's consent. Traveling with great speed, the nakodo quickly arrived at the dwelling of the Hangwan, and gave the letter to the master, who removed the cover with hands that trembled for joy. Very, very short the answer was, only these words: "Okinake bune," a boat floating in the offing. But Kane uji guessed the meaning to be: "As fortunes and misfortunes are common to all, be not afraid, and try to come unseen." Therewith he summoned Ikenoshoji, and bade him make all needful preparation for a rapid journey. Goto Sayemon consented to serve as guide. He accompanied them; and when they reached the district of Soba, and were approaching the house of the princess, the guide said to the prince: "That house before us, with the black gate, is the dwelling of the far‐famed Yokoyama Choja; and that other house to the northward of it, having a red gate, is the residence of the flower‐fair Terute. Be prudent in all things, and you will succeed." And with these words the guide disappeared. Accompanied by his faithful retainer, the Hangwan approached the red gate. Both attempted to enter, when the gatekeeper sought to prevent them. declaring they were much too bold to seek to enter the dwelling of Terute Hime, only daughter of the renowned Yokoyama Choja, the sacred child begotten through the favor of the deity of the sun. "You do but right to speak thus," the retainer made reply; "but you must learn that we are officers from the city in search of a fugitive. And it is just because all males are prohibited from entering this dwelling that a search therein must be made." Then the guards, amazed, suffered them to pass, and saw the supposed officers of justice enter the court, and many of the ladies in waiting come forth to welcome them as guests. And the lady Terute, marvelously pleased by the coming of the writer of that love letter, appeared before her wooer, robed in her robes of ceremony, with a veil about her shoulders. Kane Uji was also much delighted at being thus welcomed by the beautiful maiden; and the wedding ceremony was at once performed, to the great joy of both, and was followed by a great wine feast. So great was the mirth, and so joyful were all, that the followers of the prince and the maids of the princess danced together, and together made music. And Oguri Hangwan himself produced his flute, made of the root of a bamboo, and began to play upon it sweetly. Then the father of Terute, hearing all this joyous din in the house of his daughter, wondered greatly what the cause might be. But when he had been told how the Hangwan had become the bridegroom of his daughter without his consent, the Choja grew wondrous angry, and in secret devised a scheme of revenge. End of Appendix 3, Part 1. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix 3, Part 2 of Kokoro. Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix 3. The Ballad of Oguri Hangwan, Part 2. Section 5. The Poisoning. The next day Yokoyama sent to Prince Kane Uji a message, inviting him to come to his house, there to perform the wine-drinking ceremony of greeting each other as father-in-law and son-in-law. Then the Princess Terute sought to dissuade the Hangwan from going there, because she had dreamed in the night a dream of ill omen. But the Hangwan, making light of her fears, went boldly to the dwelling of the Choja, followed by his young retainers. Then Yokoyama Choja, rejoicing, caused many dishes to be prepared, containing all delicacies furnished by the mountains and the sea, and well entertained the Hangwan. At last, when the wine-drinking began to flag, Yokoyama uttered the wish that his guest, the Lord Kane Uji, would also furnish some entertainment. Footnote 2. The word is really sakana, fish. It has always been the rule to serve fish with sake, and gradually the word fish became used for any entertainment given during the wine party by guests, such as songs, dances, etc. End footnote 2. "And what shall it be?" the Hangwan asked. "Truly," replied the Choja, "I am desirous to see you show your great skill in riding." "Then I shall ride," the prince made answer; and presently the horse called Onikage was led out. Footnote 3. Literally, demon deer hair. The term deer hair refers to color. A less exact translation of the original characters would be the demon chestnut, Kage. Deer color also means chestnut. A chestnut horse is Kage no Uma. End footnote 3. That horse was so fierce that he did not seem to be a real horse, but rather a demon or a dragon, so that few dared even to approach him. But the Prince Hangwan Kane Uji at once loosened the chain by which the horse was fastened, and rode upon him with wondrous ease. In spite of his fierceness, Onikage found himself obliged to do everything which his rider wished. All present, Yokoyama and the others, could not speak for astonishment. But soon the Choja, taking and setting up a six-folding screen, asked to see the prince ride his steed upon the upper edge of the screen. The Lord Oguri, consenting, rode upon the top of the screen, and then he rode along the top of an upright shoji frame. Then a chessboard being set out, he rode upon it, making the horse rightly set his hoof upon the squares of the chessboard as he rode. And lastly, he made the steed balance himself upon the frame of an andon. Footnote 4. A large portable lantern, having a wooden frame and paper sides. There are andon of many forms, some remarkably beautiful. Then Yokoyama was at a loss what to do, and he could only say, bowing low to the prince: "Truly, I am grateful for your entertainment. I am very much delighted." And the Lord Oguri, having attached Onikage to a cherry tree in the garden, re entered the apartment. But Saburo, the third son of the house, having persuaded his father to kill the Hangwan with poisoned wine, urged the prince to drink sake, with which there had been mingled the venom of a blue centipede and of a blue lizard, and foul water that had long stood in the hollow joint of a bamboo. And the Hangwan and the followers, not suspecting the wine had been poisoned, drank the whole. Sad to say, the poison entered into their viscera and their intestines, and all their bones burst asunder by reason of the violence of that poison. Their lives passed from them quickly as dew in the morning from the grass; and Saburo and his father buried their corpses in the moor Uwanogahara. VI. Cast Adrift. The cruel Yokoyama thought that it would not do to suffer his daughter to live after he had thus killed her husband. Therefore he felt obliged to order his faithful servants, Onio, the king of devils, and Oniji, the next greatest devil, who were brothers, to take her far out into the Sea of Sagami, and to drown her there. And the two brothers, knowing their master was too stony hearted to be persuaded otherwise, could do nothing but obey. So they went to the unhappy lady, and told her the purpose for which they had been sent. Terute Hime was so astonished by her father's cruel decision that at first she thought all this was a dream, from which she earnestly prayed to be awakened. After a while she said: "Never in my whole life have I knowingly committed any crime; but whatever happened to my own body, I am more anxious than I can say to learn what became of my husband after he visited my father's house." "Our master," answered the two brothers, "becoming very angry at learning that you two had been wedded without his lawful permission, poisoned the young prince, according to a plan devised by your brother Saburo." Then Terute, more and more astonished, invoked with just cause a malediction upon her father for his cruelty. But she was not even allowed time to lament her fate, for Onio and his brother at once removed her garments, and put her naked body into a roll of rush matting. When this piteous package was carried out of the house at night, the princess and her waiting maids bade each other their last farewells with sobs and cries of grief. The brothers Onio and Oniji then rowed far out to sea with their pitiful burden. But when they found themselves alone, then Oniji said to Onio that it were better they should try to save their young mistress. To this the elder brother at once agreed without difficulty, and both began to think of some plan to save her. Just at the same time an empty canoe came near them, drifting with the sea current. At once the lady was placed in it; and the brothers, exclaiming, "That indeed was a fortunate happening," bade their mistress farewell, and rowed back to their master. VII. The Lady Yorihime. The canoe bearing poor Terute was tossed about by the waves for 7 days and 7 nights, during which time there was much wind and rain; and at last it was discovered by some fishermen who were fishing near Naoye. But they thought that the beautiful woman was certainly the spirit that had caused the long storm of many days, and Terute might have been killed by their oars, had not one of the men of Naoye taken her under his protection. Now this man, whose name was Murakimi Dayu, resolved to adopt the princess as his daughter, as he had no child of his own to be his heir. So he took her to his home, and named her Yorihime, and treated her so kindly that his wife grew jealous of the adopted daughter, and therefore was often cruel to her when the husband was absent. But being still more angered to find that Yorihime would not go away of her own accord, the evil-hearted woman began to devise some means of getting rid of her forever. Just at that time the ship of a kidnapper happened to cast anchor in the harbor. Needless to say that Yorihime was secretly sold to this dealer in human flesh. VIII. Becoming a servant. After this misfortune, the unhappy princess passed from one master to another as many as 75 times. Her last purchaser was one Yorodzuya Chobei, well known as the keeper of a large joroya, or brothel, in the province of Mino. When Terute Hime was first brought before this new master, she spoke meekly to him, and begged him to excuse her ignorance of all refinements and of deportment. And Chobei then asked her to tell him all about herself, her native place, and her family. But Terute Hime thought it would not be wise to mention even the name of her native province, lest she might possibly be forced to speak of the poisoning of her husband by her own father. So she resolved to answer only that she was born in Hitachi, feeling a sad pleasure in saying that she belonged to the same province in which the Lord Hangwan, her lover, used to live. "I was born," she said, "in the province of Hitachi; but I am of too low birth to have a family name. Therefore may I beseech you to bestow some suitable name upon me?" Then Terute Hime was named Kohagi of Hitachi, and she was told that she would have to serve her master very faithfully in his business. But this order she refused to obey, and said that she would perform with pleasure any work given her to do, however mean or hard, but that she would never follow the business of a joro. Then cried Chobei in anger: "Your daily tasks shall be these: to feed all the horses, 100 in number, that are kept in the stables, and to wait upon all other persons in the house when they take their meals; to dress the hair of the 36 joro belonging to this house, dressing the hair of each in the style that best becomes her; and also to fill 7 boxes with threads of twisted hemp; also to make the fire daily in 7 furnaces, and to draw water from a spring in the mountains, half a mile from here." Terute knew that neither she nor any other being alive could possibly fulfill all the tasks thus laid upon her by this cruel master, and she wept over her misfortune. But she soon felt that to weep could avail her nothing. So wiping away her tears, she bravely resolved to try what she could do, and then putting on an apron and tying back her sleeves, she set to work feeding the horses. The great mercy of the gods cannot be understood; but it is certain that as she fed the first horse, all the others, through divine influence, were fully fed at the same time. And the same wonderful thing happened when she waited upon the people of the house at mealtime, and when she dressed the hair of the girls, and when she twisted the threads of hemp, and when she went to kindle the fire in the furnaces. But saddest of all it was to see Terute Hime bearing the water buckets upon her shoulders, taking her way to the distant spring to draw water. And when she saw the reflection of her much changed face in the water with which she filled her buckets, then indeed she wept very bitterly. But the sudden remembrance of the cruel Chobei filled her with exceeding fear, and urged her back in haste to her terrible abode. But soon the master of the joroya began to see that his new servant was no common woman, and to treat her with a great show of kindness. IX. Drawing the Cart. And now we shall tell what became of Kane Uji. The far famed Yugyo Shonin of the temple of Fujisawa in Kagami, who traveled constantly in Japan to preach the law of Buddha in all the provinces, chanced to be passing over the moor Uwanogahara. There he saw many crows and kites flitting about a grave. Drawing nearer, he wondered much to see a nameless thing, seemingly without arms or legs, moving between the pieces of a broken tombstone. Then he remembered the old tradition that those who are put to death before having completed the number of years allotted to them in this world reappear or revive in the form called gaki ami. And he thought that the shape before him must be one of those unhappy spirits; and the desire arose in his kindly heart to have the monster taken to the hot springs belonging to the temple of Kumano, and thereby enable it to return to its former human state. So he had a cart made for the gaki ami; and he placed the nameless shape in it, and fastened to its breast a wooden tablet inscribed with large characters. And the words of the inscription were these: "Take pity upon this unfortunate being, and help it upon its journey to the hot springs of the temple of Kumano. Those who draw the cart even a little way by pulling the rope attached to it will be rewarded with very great good fortune. To draw the cart even 1 step shall be equal in merit to feeding 1,000 priests; and to draw it 2 steps shall be equal in merit to feeding 10,000 priests; and to draw it 3 steps shall be equal in merit to causing any dead relation, father, mother, or husband, to enter upon the way of Buddhahood." Thus very soon travelers who traveled that way took pity on the formless one. Some drew the cart several miles, and others were kind enough to draw it for many days together. And so after much time the gaki ami in its cart appeared before the joroya of Yorudzo Chobei; and Kohagi of Hitachi, seeing it, was greatly moved by the inscription. Then becoming suddenly desirous to draw the cart if even for one day only, and so to obtain for her dead husband the merit resulting from such work of mercy, she prayed her master to allow her 3 days' liberty that she might draw the cart. And she asked this for the sake of her parents; for she dared not speak of her husband, fearing the master might become very angry were he to learn the truth. Chobei at first refused, declaring in a harsh voice that since she had not obeyed his former commands, she should never be allowed to leave the house even for a single hour. But Kohagi said to him, "Lo, master, the hens go to their nests when the weather becomes cold, and the little birds hie to the deep forest. Even so do men in time of misfortune flee to the shelter of benevolence. Surely it is because you are known as a kindly man that the gaki ami rested a while outside the fence of this house. Now I shall promise to give up even a life for my master and mistress in case of need, providing you will only grant me 3 days' freedom now." So at last the miserly Chobei was persuaded to grant the prayer; and his wife was glad to add even 2 days more to the time permitted. And Kohagi, thus freed for 5 days, was so rejoiced that she at once without delay commenced her horrible task. After having with much hardship passed through such places as Fuhanoseki, Musa, Bamba, Samegaye, Ono, and Suenaga toge, she reached the famed town of Otsu in the space of 3 days. There she knew that she would have to leave the cart, since it would take her 2 days to return thence to the province of Mino. On her long way to Otsu, the only pleasing sights and sounds were the beautiful lilies growing wild by the roadside, the voices of the hibari and shijogara. Footnote 1: Hibari, a species of field lark; shijugara, a kind of titmouse. And all the birds of spring that sang in the trees, and the songs of the peasant girls who were planting the rice. But such sights and sounds could please her only a moment, for most of them caused her to dream of other days, and gave her pain by making her recollect the hopeless condition into which she had now fallen. Though greatly wearied by the hard labor she had undertaken for 3 whole days, she would not go to an inn. She passed the last night beside the nameless shape, which she would have to leave next day. "Often have I heard," she thought to herself, "that a gaki ami is a being belonging to the world of the dead. This one, then, should know something about my dead husband. Oh, that this gaki ami had the sense either of hearing or of sight! Then I could question it about Kane uji, either by word of mouth or in writing." When day dawned above the neighboring misty mountains, Kohagi went away to get an inkstone and a brush; and she soon returned with these to the place where the cart was. Then, with the brush, she wrote, below the inscription upon the wooden tablet attached to the breast of the gaki ami, these words: "When you shall have recovered and are able to return to your province, pray call upon Kohagi of Hitachi, a servant of Yorodzuya Chobei of the town of Obaka in the province of Mino. For it will give me much joy to see the person for whose sake I obtained with difficulty 5 days' freedom, 3 of which I gave to drawing your cart as far as this place." Then she bade the gaki ami farewell, and turned back upon her homeward way, although she found it very difficult thus to leave the cart alone. X. THE REVIVAL. At last the gaki ami was brought to the hot springs of the famed temple of Kumano Gongen, and by the aid of those compassionate persons who pitied its state, was daily enabled to experience the healing effects of the bath. After a single week, the effects of the bath caused the eyes, nose, ears, and mouth to reappear. After 14 days, all the limbs had been fully reformed. And after 21 days, the nameless shape was completely transformed into the real Oguri Hangwan Kane uji, perfect and handsome as he had been in other years. When this marvelous change had been effected, Kane uji looked all about him, and wondered much when and how he had been brought to that strange place. But through the august influence of the god of Kumano, things were so ordained that the revived prince could return safely to his home at Nijo in Kyoto, where his parents, the Lord Kanaiya and his spouse, welcomed him with great joy. Then the august Emperor, hearing all that had happened, thought it a wonderful thing that one of his subjects, after having been dead 3 years, should have thus revived. And not only did he gladly pardon the fault for which the Hangwan had been banished, but further appointed him to be lord ruler of the 3 provinces, Hitachi, SAGAMI and Mino. XI. THE INTERVIEW. One day Oguri Hangwan left his residence to make a journey of inspection through the provinces of which he had been appointed ruler; and reaching Mino, he resolved to visit Kohagi of Hitachi, and to utter his thanks to her for her exceeding goodness. Therefore he lodged at the house of Yorodzuya, where he was conducted to the finest of all the guest chambers, which was made beautiful with screens of gold, with Chinese carpets, with Indian hangings, with other precious things of great cost. When the lord ordered Kohagi of Hitachi to be summoned to his presence, he was answered that she was only one of the lowest menials, and too dirty to appear before him. But he paid no heed to these words, only commanding that she should come at once, no matter how dirty she might be. Therefore, much against her will, Kohagi was obliged to appear before the lord, whom she at first beheld through a screen, and saw that he was so much like the Hangwan that she was greatly startled. Oguri then asked her to tell him her real name. But Kohagi refused, saying: "If I may not serve my lord with wine, except on condition of telling my real name, then I can only leave the presence of my lord." But as she was about to go, the Hangwan called to her: "Nay, stop a little while. I have a good reason to ask your name, because I am in truth that very Gaki Ami whom you so kindly drew last year to Otsu in a cart." And with these words he produced the wooden tablet upon which Kohagi had written. Then she was greatly moved, and said: "I am very happy to see you thus recovered. And now I shall gladly tell you all my history, hoping only that you, my lord, will tell me something of that ghostly world from which you have come back, and in which my husband, alas, now dwells. I was born, it hurts my heart to speak of former times, the only daughter of Yokoyama Choja, who dwelt in the district of Soba, in the province of Sagami, and my name was Terute Hime. I remember too well, alas, having been wedded 3 years ago to a famous person of rank, whose name was Oguri Hangwan Kane Uji, who used to live in the province of Hitachi. But my husband was poisoned by my father at the instigation of his own third son, Saburo. I myself was condemned by him to be drowned in the sea of Sagami; and I owe my present existence to the faithful servants of my father, Onio and Oniji." Then the lord Hangwan said: "You see before you, Terute, your husband, Kane Uji. Although killed together with my followers, I had been destined to live in this world many years longer. By the learned priest of Fujisawa Temple I was saved; and being provided with a cart, I was drawn by many kind persons to the hot springs of Kumano, where I was restored to my former health and shape. And now I have been appointed lord ruler of the 3 provinces, and can have all things that I desire." Hearing this tale, Terute could scarcely believe it was not all a dream; and she wept for joy. Then she said: "Ah, since last I saw you, what hardships have I not passed through! For 7 days and 7 nights I was tossed about upon the sea in a canoe. Then I was in a great danger in the bay of Naoye, and was saved by a kind man called Murakami Deyu. And after that I was sold and bought 75 times; and the last time I was brought here, where I have been made to suffer all kinds of hardship only because I refused to become a joro. That is why you now see me in so wretched a condition." Very angry was Kane Uji to hear of the cruel conduct of the inhuman Chobei, and desired to kill him at once. But Terute besought her husband to spare the man's life, and so fulfilled the promise she had long before made to Chobei, that she would give even her own life, if necessary, for her master and mistress, on condition of being allowed 5 days' freedom to draw the cart of the Gaki Ami. And for this Chobei was really grateful; and in compensation he presented the Hangwan with the 100 horses from his stable, and gave to Terute the 36 servants belonging to his house. And then Terute Hime, appropriately attired, went away with the Prince Kane Uji; and they began their journey to Sagami with hearts full of joy. XII. THE VENGEANCE. This is the district of Soba, in the province of Sagami, the native land of Terute. How many beautiful and how many sorrowful thoughts does it recall to their minds! And here also are Yokoyama and his son, who killed Lord Oguri with poison. So Saburo, the third son, being led to the moor called Totsuka no Hara, was there punished. But Yokoyama Choja, wicked as he had been, was not punished; because parents, however bad, must be for their children always like the sun and moon. and hearing this order, Yokoyama repented very greatly for that which he had done. Onio and Oniji, the brothers, were rewarded with many gifts for having saved the Princess Terute off the coast of Sagami. Thus those who were good prospered, and the bad were brought to destruction. Fortunate and happy, Oguri Sama and Terute Hime together returned to Miyako to dwell in the residence at Nijo; and their union was beautiful as the blossoming of spring. Fortunate, fortunate! End of Appendix 3. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix 4 of Kokoro. Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Appendix 4. The Ballad of Oshichi, the Daughter of the Yaoya. In autumn the deer are lured within reach of the hunters by the sounds of the flute, which resemble the sounds of the voices of their mates, and so are killed. Almost in like manner, one of 5 most beautiful girls in Edo, whose comely faces charmed all the capital even as the spring blossoming of cherry trees, cast away her life in the moment of blindness caused by love. When, having done a foolish thing, she was brought before the mayor of the city of Edo, that high official questioned the young criminal, asking: "Are you not Oshichi, the daughter of the Yaoya? And being so young, how came you to commit such a dreadful crime as incendiarism?" Then Oshichi, weeping and wringing her hands, made this answer: "Indeed, that is the only crime I ever committed; and I had no extraordinary reason for it but this. Once before, when there had been a great fire, so great a fire that nearly all Edo was consumed, our house also was burned down; and we 3, my parents and I, knowing no other where to go, took shelter in a Buddhist temple, to remain there until our house could be rebuilt. Surely the destiny that draws 2 young persons to each other is hard to understand. In that temple there was a young acolyte, and love grew up between us. In secret we met together, and promised never to forsake each other; and we pledged ourselves to each other by sucking blood from small cuts we made in our little fingers, and by exchanging written vows that we should love each other forever. Before our pillows had yet become fixed." Footnote 2: This curious expression has its origin in the Japanese saying that lovers exchange pillows. In the dark, the little Japanese wooden pillows might easily be exchanged by mistake. While the pillows were not yet definite or fixed would mean, therefore, while the 2 lovers were still in the habit of seeking each other secretly at night. Our new house in Hongo was built and made ready for us. But from that day, when I bade a sad farewell to Kichija Sama, to whom I had pledged myself for the time of 2 existences, never was my heart consoled by even one letter from the acolyte. Alone in my bed at night I used to think and think, and at last in a dream there came to me the dreadful idea of setting fire to the house as the only means of again being able to meet my beautiful lover. Then, one evening, I got a bundle of dry rushes, and placed inside it some pieces of live charcoal, and I secretly put the bundle into a shed at the back of the house. A fire broke out, and there was a great tumult, and I was arrested and brought here. Oh, how dreadful it was! I will never, never commit such a fault again. But whatever happen, oh, pray save me, my Bugyo! Oh, pray take pity on me!" Ah, the simple apology! But what was her age? Not 12, not 13, not 14. 15 comes after 14. Alas! She was 15, and could not be saved. Therefore Oshichi was sentenced according to the law. But first she was bound with strong cords, and was for 7 days exposed to public view on the bridge called Nihonbashi. Ah, what a piteous sight it was! Her aunts and cousins, even Bekurai and Kakusuke, the house servants, had often to wring their sleeves, so wet were their sleeves with tears. But because the crime could not be forgiven, Oshichi was bound to 4 posts, and fuel was kindled, and the fire rose up, and poor Oshichi in the midst of that fire. Even so the insects of summer fly to the flame. End of Appendix 4. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. End of Kokoro. HINTS AND ECHOES OF JAPANESE INNER LIFE by Lafcadio Hearn